Tonight, we're diving into everything you might wish to know before the new Harry Potter series arrives. A slow and gentle tour of the whole wizarding world, gathered here, so that whether you are meeting this story for the very first time or simply drifting back to it after many years, you can settle in and let it wash over you. Let your shoulders soften and let the room around you grow dim and warm. There is nothing here that can reach you, only a calm and unhurried telling of a world hidden just beside our own. Over the next 20 chapters we will wander, without any haste, through all of it. The secret world behind the ordinary one. The boy who lived. The ancient castle of Hogwarts and its 4 houses. The way magic and wands and spells are said to work. The ministry and its laws. The long shadow of Lord Voldemort and the 2 wars fought against him. The 3 friends at the heart of the tale. The horcruxes and the hallows. The strange and wonderful creatures. And the great battle where it all came to rest. And at the end, we will look softly ahead to how the new series may tell this story once more. You do not need to remember any of it. Let the story move through you like a slow tide, and let it carry you gently down towards sleep. There is a world hidden quietly beside our own, and it has been there all along, folded into the ordinary hours of ordinary days, waiting just out of sight for anyone soft enough of heart to notice it. It is a world of wands and owls and warm firelight, of shops that appear where a moment before there was only a brick wall, of trains that leave from platforms no timetable will ever list. Most people walk past its doorways every single day and never feel the faint shimmer of magic pressing gently against the edges of their lives, and that is exactly how the wizarding world wishes it to be. For those who live within it, the secret is not a burden, but a comfort, a soft blanket drawn over centuries of wonder. And tonight, as your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to drift, you are invited to slip beneath that blanket and rest for a while in the hush of a world most people never see. To understand how such a world could hide so completely, you must first understand the great and gentle promise that keeps it hidden. A promise written down long ago and known to every witch and wizard as the International Statute of Secrecy. It was agreed upon in the year 1689, in a time when those who could not perform magic had grown fearful of those who could, and it was signed at last in 1692, binding the magical peoples of the world to live quietly, apart, and unseen. The statute asked each wizard and witch to keep their gifts private, to shield the ordinary folk, whom they call muggles, from ever learning that magic was real, and in return the magical world was given peace and the long, slow safety of being left alone. And so the 2 worlds settled side by side, like 2 rivers running close together beneath the same soft sky, never quite touching, yet always aware of one another in the quiet way that neighbors are. If you were an ordinary person walking through the busy streets of London, you might pass, without a single flicker of curiosity, a small and shabby public house called the Leaky Cauldron, tucked between a great bookshop and a record shop on a crowded stretch of road. Your eyes would slide away from its grimy windows and its dark old door, for the little inn is charmed so that muggles simply do not see it, and you would go on your way thinking only of your errands. But a witch or a wizard would step gladly inside, into the warm and smoky gloom, and would make their way through the low rooms to a small walled courtyard at the back, where nothing waited but a scattering of weeds and an ordinary brick wall. There, with the gentle tap of a wand upon 3 carefully chosen bricks, the wall would begin to move, the bricks folding and sliding and drawing themselves apart, until an archway opened onto a long and winding cobbled street, and beyond that archway lay Diagon Alley. Diagon Alley is the beating heart of magical Britain, a crooked, glittering lane of shops that lean together as if sharing whispered secrets, their windows crowded with the strange and the marvelous. There are stacks of spellbooks bound in leather and clasped with brass, and cauldrons of every size piled in shining towers outside the apothecary. There are barrels of bat spleens and eel's eyes, coils of shimmering dragon liver, and windows full of telescopes and silver instruments that turn and gleam. There are robes of every color hanging in soft folds, and quills of every feather, and creamy owls hooting sleepily from their cages. The air smells of parchment and polish, and something sweeter underneath, and everywhere there is the low murmur of witches and wizards going about the small business of a magical life, so that the whole street hums like a hive in summer, gentle and unhurried and full of quiet delight. Rising above all of it, tall and white and just a little crooked, stands the wizarding bank called Gringotts, and it is run not by people, but by goblins. Small, sharp, clever creatures with long fingers and longer memories, who have guarded the gold of the magical world for more centuries than anyone can easily count. Deep beneath the marble hall of the bank, far below the streets of London, lie the vaults, chamber after chamber carved into the living rock, reached only by little carts that rattle and swoop along winding underground tracks through the dark. It is said that Gringotts is the safest place in all the world save one, protected by spells and by enchantments, and, in its deepest hollows, by sleeping dragons, and that a thief foolish enough to try to steal from it might find themselves trapped in the depths for years, never to be found. Yet to those who bank there, it is simply where the family gold is kept, counted in gleaming coins called galleons and sickles and nuts, and drawn out with nothing more than a small brass key. Not far along the alley, in a narrow and shabby little shop with a single dusty wand resting upon a faded purple cushion in the window, is the place where every young witch and wizard must go before they can truly begin, and that place is Ollivander's. It has stood there since the year 382 before the Common Era, making fine wands longer than most kingdoms have stood. And inside it is quiet and dim, its walls stacked high with thousands upon thousands of narrow boxes reaching up into the shadows. For it is often said among wand makers that the wand chooses the wizard, and never quite the other way around, and so a child will stand very still in the hush of that ancient shop while box after box is opened, until at last the right wand is placed into a waiting hand, and a warmth spreads through the fingers, and a scatter of sparks tells everyone in the room that a bond has been made that will last a lifetime. Beyond Diagon Alley, the quiet magics of this hidden world are threaded gently through the whole of ordinary Britain, so soft and so patient that no muggle ever quite catches them at their work. Owls glide silently through the night sky, carrying letters and parcels bound to their legs, for the wizarding folk send their post not by van or by stamp, but by these steady, watchful birds, who always seem to know exactly where to go. In snug sitting rooms, families travel from hearth to hearth by tossing a pinch of glittering flue powder into the fire, so that the flames leap up emerald green, and a witch may step into them and be whisked away, turning gently through a great network of connected fireplaces to step out somewhere else entirely. There are potions simmering in kitchens, and small charms whispered over mending socks, and cupboards that hold rather more than they should, all of it woven so quietly into the fabric of everyday life that the two worlds brush past each other 1,000 times a day and never once collide. And once a year, on the first day of September, this gentle secrecy performs perhaps its loveliest trick of all at a busy railway station in the heart of London called King's Cross. There, between Platform 9 and Platform 10, stands an ordinary barrier, a solid stretch of brick where the crowds hurry by with their suitcases and their sleepy children. And yet for those who know the way, that barrier is not solid at all. A witch or wizard need only walk toward it, calm and unhurried and quietly sure, and lean gently forward, and the brick will give way like mist, and they will pass clean through to a hidden platform on the other side, Platform 9 3/4, where a great scarlet steam engine waits beneath a canopy of drifting smoke. That train is the Hogwarts Express, and it carries the young of the wizarding world away to a castle they cannot yet imagine, and the whole marvel of it unfolds only a few soft steps from where ordinary travelers stand, entirely unaware. Up next in Chapter 2, The Boy Who Lived will drift back to a very quiet street of very ordinary houses and rest there in the hush of a single autumn night to meet the sleeping child at the very center of this whole gentle story. Chapter 2. The boy who lived in the hidden world you have just wandered through, the world of moving staircases and sleeping portraits and owls carrying letters across a darkening sky, there was once a single name that everyone knew, a name that mothers whispered over cradles and old wizards spoke softly in warm and crowded pubs, and that name was Harry Potter. Long before he could walk, long before he could speak a single word, he was already the most famous child in all of the magical land. And yet he knew nothing of it at all, for he was only a baby, small and round and quiet, sleeping in a cot in a little house in a village called Godric's Hollow, while the wide dark night settled gently over the rooftops. His mother was named Lily, a woman with warm green eyes and a laugh like sunlight through leaves, and his father was named James, tall and quick and brave, with untidy black hair that would never lie flat no matter how he smoothed it. The two of them loved the small boy more than anything the world could hold, and they had wrapped their little house in every protection they knew, hoping to keep him safe, for these were dangerous years, and a shadow had fallen across the wizarding world. That shadow was a dark wizard so feared that most people would not even say his name aloud, choosing instead to call him You-Know-Who, or He Who Must Not Be Named, though his true name was Lord Voldemort. Voldemort had grown terribly powerful, and he had gathered followers, and he sought to rule the whole of the magical world through fear. Yet there was a reason that of all the families in all the land, he came at last to the little house in Godric's Hollow on that particular autumn night. Before Harry was ever born, a prophecy had been spoken, a quiet and strange foretelling, and it hinted that a child would one day be born with the power to bring the dark wizard down, a child marked as his equal. Voldemort, hearing only a whisper of these words, believed the child could only be the son of Lily and James, and so, on the night of the 31st of October, he came for the baby. He came softly through the dark, and he entered the little house, and he faced James first, and James fought bravely to give his wife and son time to flee, but he fell. Then Voldemort climbed the stairs to the small warm room where Lily stood between the cradle and the door, refusing to step aside, begging with all her heart that the dark wizard take her instead and spare her little boy. She would not move, and she gave up her own life rather than let him near her child, and in doing so, though she could not have known it, she wove around Harry a protection older and deeper than any spell, a protection made of pure and selfless love. And then Voldemort turned his wand upon the baby in the cot, and he spoke the words of the killing curse. The curse that no one had ever survived, a jet of green light rushing through the quiet nursery. Yet something happened that night that had never happened before in all the long history of magic. The curse struck the child and did not kill him. Instead, it rebounded. It turned back upon the one who had cast it, and it was Lord Voldemort himself who was broken and scattered and driven from his own body, fleeing as something less than a ghost, weaker than the weakest living thing, into the wild and lonely places of the world. The great dark wizard was gone, and the baby remained, alive, breathing softly, marked only by a thin cut upon his forehead in the shape of a lightning bolt. That small scar would never truly fade, and it became the sign by which the whole world would know him. When the news spread the next morning, wizards and witches who had lived for years in fear stepped out into the light and wept for joy and celebrated in the streets. And they lifted their glasses to a name they would honor forever, the boy who lived. Harry Potter, not yet old enough to understand a single thing that had befallen him, had ended a war simply by surviving, and he had become a legend before he could even remember his own mother's face. But the wise and gentle guardians of the magical world knew that a baby could not be raised amid such fame and wonder, and so it was decided, on a hushed and windy evening, that Harry would be carried far away from all of it, into the ordinary world of people who had no magic at all. A great and towering half-giant named Rubeus Hagrid gathered the sleeping child in his enormous arms and carried him gently down out of the sky, and the boy was left upon a doorstep in a neat and narrow street in a town called Little Wingjing, with a letter tucked beside him explaining all that had happened. The house belonged to his only living family, his mother's sister, a thin and sharp-faced woman named Petunia, and her large and bad-tempered husband, Vernon Dursley, and their small son, Dudley. The Dursleys were as ordinary as any people could ever wish to be, and they wanted nothing at all to do with magic, which frightened and embarrassed them, and so they took the boy in only because they had to, and they did their best to pretend he was hardly there. Harry grew up in that tidy house without ever being told the truth of who he was. He slept for years in a small dark cupboard beneath the stairs. He was given his cousin's old and oversized clothes, and he was scolded and overlooked and left to feel that he did not quite belong anywhere in the world. He knew nothing of his parents beyond a cold story that they had died in a car crash, and nothing at all of the lightning scar upon his brow, save that it had always been there. And yet, quietly, strange things gathered around him. His hair grew back overnight when it was cut too short. A jumper shrank, rather than let itself be pulled over his head, and once, without meaning to, he found himself upon a high roof he could not remember climbing. These small wonders puzzled and troubled the Dursleys, who scolded him all the harder. But they were the first soft signs that the magic within him had never left, that it was only waiting, gentle and patient, for the day it would be welcomed home. That day came at last upon his 11th birthday. Letters had begun to arrive for him, addressed in emerald green ink to the very cupboard where he slept, and though his uncle burned them and tore them, and fled with the whole family to a lonely hut upon a rock in the sea, still the letters came, more and more of them, until, at midnight, in a great storm, the door was shaken by an enormous fist. It was Hagrid again, come once more for the boy, no longer a baby but a small and wondering child, and it was Hagrid who spoke the words that would change everything, telling Harry, warmly and simply, that he was a wizard, and that a place had been kept for him all along at a school called Hogwarts. And so, slowly, The truth unfolded before him like a window opening onto a bright and secret garden. The truth of his parents, of the night he could not remember, of the name the whole world knew but he had never heard, and of the strange and shadowed fate that bound him to the dark wizard who had fallen. With his letter in hand, and a whole hidden world waiting, Harry Potter took his first steps toward the life that had been his all along, toward the towers and the lakes and the great stone castle where he would finally belong. Up next, in Chapter 3, Hogwarts and its 4 houses. We'll drift together through the enchanted gates of that ancient school and settle in beside its warm fires to learn of the 4 great houses and the gentle sorting that welcomes every child home. Chapter 3. Hogwarts and its 4 houses far to the north, where the hills of Scotland fold into one another like sleeping animals and the mist gathers softly over dark still lakes, there stands a castle that no ordinary traveler has ever found. It is called Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and for more than 1,000 years it has waited there among the mountains. Its many towers rising quietly into the clouds, its windows glowing gold against the deep blue of the northern night. To the eyes of anyone who cannot do magic, the castle is hidden entirely, disguised so that it seems no more than a crumbling ruin, a dangerous heap of old stone wrapped in warning signs, and so it has kept its secrets safe and undisturbed through all the long, slow centuries. But to the young witches and wizards who are welcomed there, Hogwarts is the most wonderful place in all the world, and it is, in every way that truly matters, a home. When the boy who lived, the boy named Harry, first came to it, he crossed a great black lake in a little boat under a sky full of stars, and the castle rose before him on its high cliff, with all its windows shining, and he felt something he had almost never felt before, a feeling of arriving somewhere he was always meant to be. Every child who comes to Hogwarts crosses that same dark water in the very first hour of their very first night, and every child feels that same quiet wonder settle over them like a warm blanket drawn up to the chin. The castle itself is a place of endless gentle marvels, so many that a person could wander its corridors for 7 long years and never learn them all. There are 142 staircases inside its walls, and the staircases do not always stay where they are put. Some of them like to move, swinging slowly from one landing to another, so that a student walking up to a lesson might find the steps drifting quietly beneath their feet, carrying them somewhere new, and they must simply wait, patient and unhurried, until the stairs decide to settle again. There are doors that will not open unless you ask them politely, and doors that are not doors at all, but only walls pretending, and doors that open only on certain days or when a person happens to need them most. Upon the walls of Hogwarts hang hundreds upon hundreds of portraits, and each portrait holds a painted person who is quite alive in their own gentle way, dozing in their frames, wandering off to visit their neighbors, whispering the small news of the castle to one another through the long, quiet hours. Suits of armor stand in the alcoves and sometimes hum old songs to themselves. Ghosts drift softly through the halls, pale and kindly for the most part, gliding through solid stone without a sound. And high above the great hall where everyone gathers to eat, the ceiling has been enchanted so cleverly, so long ago, that it looks exactly like the sky outside, so that on a clear night 1,000 painted candles float beneath a scattering of real and gleaming stars, and on a soft evening the students eat their supper beneath a ceiling of drifting cloud and gathering dusk. Around the castle lie the grounds, wide and green and rolling gently down to the water. There is the great lake, deep and dark and cool, where a giant squid turns slowly in the shallows and merpeople sing far below the surface. There is the forbidden forest at the edge of everything, ancient and shadowed, and full of quiet creatures, and there is a little wooden hut near the trees where the gamekeeper lives among his pumpkins. There are greenhouses full of curious plants, and a walled garden, and long sloping lawns where students lie in the grass on warm afternoons and watch the owls come home. All of it belongs to Hogwarts, and Hogwarts, in some deep and living way, belongs to all of it. Now, on the very first night that a new student arrives, before the great feast begins, there is a most important and most gentle ceremony. All the youngest students are gathered together in the vast candlelit hall, and there before them, upon a small wooden stool, is placed a single object, old and frayed and patched. A pointed wizard's hat the color of weathered leather. This is the sorting hat, and it is far older and far wiser than it looks. One by one each child sits upon the stool, and the hat is lowered gently over their eyes, and it looks quietly into their heart, considering all that it finds there, the courage and the kindness and the cleverness and the quiet longing, and then it decides, softly and surely, into which of the 4 great houses that child belongs. For Hogwarts is divided into 4 houses, and each one is like a family within the larger family of the school, a smaller warm circle to belong to for all the 7 years a student stays. There is Gryffindor, whose colors are the deep red of embers and the warm gold of firelight, the house of the brave and the bold and the daring of heart, whose symbol is a lion and whose spirit is courage. There is Slytherin, whose colors are silver and green, the house of the ambitious and the cunning and the quietly determined, whose symbol is a serpent, and whose spirit is resourcefulness. There is Hufflepuff, whose colors are warm yellow and gentle black, the house of the loyal and the patient and the hard-working and the true, whose symbol is a badger, and whose spirit is kindness, and it is said that Hufflepuff turns no one away and values fair play above all things. And there is Ravenclaw, whose colors are blue and bronze, the house of the clever and the curious and the thoughtful, those who love to learn and wonder and understand, whose symbol is an eagle and whose spirit is wisdom. No house is better than another, though the children who belong to each will always love their own the best, and that is exactly as it should be. Each house has its own tower or its own cozy quarters tucked away somewhere in the great sprawling castle, reached by a secret path that only its own members know. Gryffindor students climb high into one of the towers, past a portrait of a lady in a pink dress who guards their door and asks them for a password before she swings aside. Deep beneath the lake, in rooms lit with a soft green underwater glow, the students of Slytherin have their common room, cool and quiet and grand. The Hufflepuffs live snug and low near the warm kitchens, behind a stack of barrels, in round earthy rooms full of plants and comfortable yellow chairs. And the Ravenclaws climb a winding stair to a breezy tower room with a domed ceiling painted with stars, where a door with an eagle knocker asks them a riddle rather than a password. In each of these common rooms there is a fireplace, and there are deep, soft armchairs, and there are dormitories where the beds are hung with curtains in the house colors, 4 poster beds warm and heavy with blankets, where the students sleep soundly through the northern nights while the fire burns low and the castle breathes quietly all around them. It is a comfort almost beyond words to belong somewhere so completely, to have a bed that is truly yours in a tower that is truly home. Through all the years, the 4 houses gently compete for glory, not with sharpness, but with a warm and friendly striving. When a student does something kind or clever or brave, their house is given points, small glowing tokens that gather in great jeweled hourglasses standing in a quiet chamber, filling slowly with rubies or emeralds or sapphires or bright yellow gems. And at the end of each long year, the house with the most points is awarded the House Cup, a shining silver trophy and a moment of quiet pride, and then the whole thing begins again, gentle and unhurried, year after year after year. Watching over all of it are the professors, wise and patient teachers who have given their lives to the castle, and above them all the headmaster, the greatest and kindest wizard of the age, whose long silver beard and gentle twinkling eyes seem to hold every secret of the school within them. Under their quiet care, the children learn and grow, safe within the ancient walls, held by the old stones and the moving stairs, and the painted ceiling of stars, and Hogwarts folds each new student softly into its long, slow, 1,000-year story and calls them home. Up next in Chapter 4, the Founders and the 1,000-Year Story will drift back gently through the centuries to meet the 4 great witches and wizards who first raised these walls and dreamed this castle into being, and learn how their friendship and their differences shaped the 4 houses that welcome every child still. Chapter 4. The Founders and the 1,000-Year Story. Long before any of the students who now walk the corridors of Hogwarts were born, long before their parents or their grandparents or their great-great-grandparents drew a single breath, the castle upon the hill was only an idea, a warm and hopeful thought shared among 4 remarkable people who lived more than 1,000 years ago. In those distant days, when the world was younger and far more uncertain, magic was something to be hidden and feared, and young witches and wizards often grew up frightened of the strange power that stirred inside them, with no one to teach them, no one to guide them, and no safe place to gather. And so it was that 4 of the greatest magical minds the world had ever known came together, drawn by friendship and by a shared and gentle dream, to build a home where such children might learn in peace. Their names have echoed softly down through the centuries, spoken like the names of old and beloved friends. There was Godric Gryffindor, a broad and warm-hearted man from the wild and windy moors, brave beyond measure, yet kind to those who were smaller and weaker than himself. There was Salazar Slytherin, a clever and watchful wizard who came from the low green fens where the water lay still and quiet, a man of sharp mind and deep ambition who could speak with serpents in their own soft hissing tongue. There was Helga Hufflepuff, gentle and generous, a woman from the broad and rolling valleys who believed with her whole heart that every willing child deserved a chance to learn, and who was known far and wide for her patience and her care. And there was Rowena Ravenclaw, brilliant and thoughtful, a witch from the distant highlands whose love of wisdom and whose quick and shining intelligence were said to be without equal in all the land. These 4 were friends, the very closest of friends, bound together by their love of magic and by their longing to protect the young. In the beginning, their dream was one dream, single and whole and beautiful, and they poured all their gifts into it together. Upon a lonely hill beside a great dark lake, in a part of the country wrapped in mist and quiet, they raised a castle of gray stone, and they wove into its very walls enchantments so deep and so lasting that no 1,000 years would ever wear them away. They named the school Hogwarts, and they meant it to stand as a refuge, a lantern glowing warmly against the cold and the fear of the wider world. It was said that each of the 4 founders shaped a part of the school in the image of what they most treasured. Godric Gryffindor gathered to himself the brave of heart, those who were daring and bold, and willing to stand for what was right. Salazar Slytherin drew close the cunning and the ambitious, those with cleverness and resolve, who dreamed of great things. Helga Hufflepuff welcomed all who were loyal and hard-working and true, turning none away. For she believed that worth was found in honest effort and in a kind and steady heart. And Rowena Ravenclaw chose the wise and the curious, those who loved learning for its own sweet sake, and who delighted in the turning of a difficult thought. In this way the 4 houses were born, each a reflection of a founder, and together they made a whole that was greater and richer than any one of them alone. For a time, a long and golden time, all was well between the 4. They taught side by side, they laughed together in the great hall, and they watched with quiet pride as generation after generation of children came to Hogwarts, frightened, and left it strong. Yet even the deepest friendships may be tested by a single question upon which 2 hearts cannot agree, and so it came to pass with the founders of Hogwarts. The question that slowly grew between them was this: who should be allowed to come and learn within the castle walls? 3 of the 4 believed that any child born with magic should be welcomed, whether that child came from a family of witches and wizards, or from a family of ordinary people with no magic at all, the people whom the wizarding world would come to call muggles. Godric and Helga and Rowena saw no reason to close the door upon a gifted child simply because of the family into which that child had happened to be born. But Salazar Slytherin came to think otherwise. Over the long years, his heart grew colder upon this single point, and he came to believe that magic should be taught only to those born of magical families, and that the children of muggles should be turned quietly away. It was a sorrowful disagreement, made all the sadder because it grew between people who had once loved one another so completely. The rift widened slowly, the way a small crack in old stone will widen with the passing of many winters. Words were exchanged, gentle at first, and then less gentle, and the warmth that had once filled the great hall began to cool between Salazar and the others. Most of all, between Salazar and his old friend Godric, whose views could not have stood farther apart. And in the end, when it became clear that no agreement would ever be reached, Salazar Slytherin gathered his cloak about him and departed from the school he had helped to raise, leaving his 3 friends behind him and passing out through the great doors and away into the wide world, never, it was said, to return. Yet the legend did not end with his leaving, for a whisper began to spread, quiet and strange, that before he went, Salazar Slytherin had hidden somewhere deep within the castle a secret chamber, a chamber of secrets known to him alone, sealed against all who came after, and meant to be opened only by his own true heir in some far-off age still to come. Within that hidden chamber, the old stories murmured, Slytherin had left behind a guardian, a creature of terrible power, that his heir might one day loose upon the school to finish the work he himself had left undone, and to drive out those he believed did not belong. For long centuries this was thought to be no more than a tale, a shadow of an old sorrow, and many searched the castle and found nothing at all. But some legends sleep only lightly, and this one would stir again in years far distant from the founders' own time. The 3 founders who remained carried on as best they could, their circle broken yet their purpose unbroken, and in time each of them passed from the world as all people must. Yet they left behind them more than the castle and the houses. They left relics, treasured objects that had belonged to them in life. And these too would matter greatly in the ages that followed. There was a golden cup that had been Helga Hufflepuff's, small and finely made, marked with the sign of her badger. There was a diadem, a slender silver crown that had belonged to Rowena Ravenclaw and was said to make wiser any who wore it. There was a sword of gleaming silver set with rubies that bore the name of Godric Gryffindor, and there was a heavy locket marked with a serpent that had come down from Salazar Slytherin himself. Each of these objects would drift through the long river of history, lost and found and lost again, until in a distant century they would come to hold a weight and a danger that their makers could never have foreseen. And so the castle stood and went on standing. The founders passed into memory and then into legend, and still Hogwarts remained upon its hill beside the dark and glassy lake, sheltering child after child through war and peace, through winter and summer, through 1,000 turning years. Its towers were struck by storms and mended, its halls were filled and emptied and filled again, and always the old enchantments held, warm and patient and deep. The school became far more than 4 friends had ever dreamed, a living thing woven of countless lives, and though the 4 who built it were long gone, something of each of them lingered still in the stones, quiet and enduring, like a lullaby that never quite fades away. Up next in Chapter 5, Wands, Spells, and How Magic Works, we'll drift gently into the very heart of magic itself, learning how a slender wand chooses its witch or wizard, how soft words and careful movements can call light and warmth into being, and how the strange and wonderful power that the founders once gathered under one roof truly flows. Chapter 5, Wands, Spells, and How Magic Works. The 4 founders who shaped the castle in the far green north believed above all else that magic was something to be taught, something passed slowly from one gentle hand to another, and so it is worth pausing now, in the soft hush of this quiet hour, to wander through the ways magic is actually practiced in this hidden world that sits so close beside our own. Magic in this world is not a single sudden burst of light that arrives whole and finished. It is far closer to a craft, something patient and living, learned the way a child learns to walk, or a musician learns a slow and tender song, note by note, year by year, mistake by gentle mistake, until at last the movement becomes as natural as breathing in the warm dark. At the very heart of this craft lies the wand, and there is perhaps no object in all of the wizarding world spoken of with such quiet reverence. A wand is not merely a tool, not a hammer or a spoon or a key, but something almost alive, a slender length of wood chosen with great care and holding, deep within its center, a hidden core that gives it its power. These cores are drawn from the most magical of creatures, and there are 3 that are spoken of most often and most fondly. The first is the tail feather of a phoenix, that noble bird of flame and rebirth, which gives a wand a rare and independent spirit. The second is a single strand from the heart of a dragon, warm and full of force, quick to learn and quick to bond. And the third is a hair from the mane of a unicorn, gentle and faithful and steady, seldom given to sudden turns of mood. Each core lends the wand a temper of its own, and no 2 wands, it is said, are ever truly quite alike. There is an old saying, whispered so often that it has almost become a truth of nature, that it is the wand that chooses the wizard, and not the other way around. A witch or a wizard does not simply walk into a shop and select a wand as one might choose an apple from a wooden crate. Instead, there is a quiet and mysterious matching, a sense that a particular wand, resting patient on its shelf, has been waiting for a particular hand, and that when the right person at last takes hold of it, Something warm and unmistakable passes between them. A small stir of recognition, a settling, as though two old friends have found each other again after a very long while apart. Nowhere is this gentle ceremony more sacred than in the ancient shop of Ollivanders, tucked away down a narrow lane in the Wizarding Street of London, its window bearing the faded promise that fine wands have been made there since a year long, before most kingdoms had even taken shape. The shop is small and dim, and stacked to its shadowed ceiling with thousands upon thousands of slim boxes, each one holding a wand and its own quiet destiny. And the old wand maker who tends it seems to remember every single wand he has ever sold, the wood and the core and the length and the hand that carried it away. To be measured for a first wand in that dusty, waiting stillness is, for many a young witch or wizard, the very moment their new life truly begins. Yet the wand alone is only half of the whole, for a wand without knowledge is like a fine instrument in a room where no one has learned to play. To cast a spell, a witch or a wizard must join the wand to two other things, and the joining of all three is where the true art lies. The first is the incantation, the spoken word, often shaped from old and rounded Latin, a word to name the intention and to gather it into sound. The second is the wand movement, a precise and particular gesture of the wrist, a swish here, a flick there, a small circle or a sudden sharp point, each spell asking for its own exact motion. And beneath both of these runs the third and quietest thing of all, which is the will and the concentration of the one who casts, the calm inner focus that gathers the magic and sends it gently on its way. When word and movement and will come together in perfect balance, the spell blooms into being, and a feather may rise, or a light may kindle, or a locked door may swing softly open in the dark. At the great school in the north, this vast and wondrous craft is gathered into branches, each one a subject to be studied slowly across the long turning of the years. There is charms, perhaps the warmest and most useful of them all, the study of spells that add new properties to an object or coax it into gentle motion, teaching a young student to make a feather float, to summon a distant thing into an open hand, or to fill a cold room with soft and floating light. There is transfiguration, older and more demanding, the delicate art of changing one thing into another, turning a beetle into a button or a teacup into a small and blinking mouse, a discipline that asks for great precision and a very steady mind. There is potions, brewed patiently down in the cool stone dungeons, where there are no wands at all, but only the careful measuring and stirring of strange ingredients in a bubbling cauldron, a slow chemistry of the magical world that can heal, or calm, or grant sleep, or work 100 other quiet wonders. There is herbology too, taught out among the warm and misty greenhouses, the study of magical plants and fungi, of leaves that whisper and roots that cry, and blossoms that must be tended with gloved and gentle care. And there is defense against the dark arts, in which young witches and wizards learn how to shield themselves and others, how to ward away harmful creatures and unfriendly charms, how to stand calm and protected when the world grows strange around them. Alongside these run yet more paths of learning, the reading of the stars in astronomy, the long tale of magic in history, the watching of the heavens for meaning in other quiet studies, so that the whole of a magical education becomes a wide and patient garden of many growing things. And here it is gentle to remember that not all magic is the same in its heart. Most magic is everyday and kindly, the small and helpful sort that lights a lamp, mends a torn robe, warms a pot of soup, or sweeps a floor while its owner rests. This is the magic woven quietly through ordinary life, so common to those born into it that they scarcely notice the wonder of it at all. But there is also a darker branch, the dark arts, magic bent toward harm and control and cruelty, and it is treated with great care and great caution, studied at the school only so that it may be understood and resisted, never embraced. The difference between the two lies not always in the spell itself, but in the intention behind it, in whether the will that guides the wand is turned toward kindness or toward harm. And this quiet truth sits at the very center of what it means to be a good and gentle witch or wizard. For in the end, magic in this world is never a shortcut, and never a gift given whole and finished. It is a craft learned slowly, through patience and practice, and no small number of gentle failures, through feathers that will not float on the first try, and potions that turn the wrong shade of green, until at last, after many soft and unhurried years, the movements settle into the hands, and the words settle into the heart. And the young student becomes, quietly and without quite noticing the moment it happened, a true worker of wonders. Up next in Chapter 6, the Ministry of Magic and Wizarding Law, we'll drift together through the great governing halls of this hidden world and wander gently among the rules and offices and unseen keepers who hold the whole of the magical community safe and secret in the soft and sleeping dark. Chapter 6. The Ministry of Magic and Wizarding Law in the chapters before this one. We followed the slender path of the wand, the way a length of wood and a sliver of some magical core came together in a wizard's hand, and the way a spell rose gently from that meeting like warmth rising from a hearth. We watched the soft light of Lumos and the swish and flick that lifted a feather into the air, and we came to understand that magic, for all its wonder, was a thing that could be learned, practiced, and shaped with patience. Yet where there is power, there must also be order, and where there are witches and wizards casting spells across a whole country, there must be someone to keep the peace, to write the rules, and to guard the great secret that holds their world together. And so, as the night settles a little deeper around you, we turn now to the quiet machinery of that order, to the government of Wizarding Britain, which was called the Ministry of Magic. The Ministry of Magic lay hidden far beneath the busy streets of London, deep underground, where the ordinary people walking above never guessed that a whole world of witches and wizards worked below their feet. To reach it, those who belonged there might step into an old red telephone box on a quiet street, or they might travel by the strange and dizzying magic of the Flu network, arriving through one of the many fireplaces that lined its grand entrance hall. That hall was a long and beautiful space, its floor of dark polished wood, its ceiling of deep peacock blue set with golden symbols that shifted and moved like a sky that could not make up its mind. Fireplaces glowed all along the walls, and figures in flowing robes came and went through them, unhurried, as though this were simply the shape of an ordinary morning. It was a place of hush and echo, of soft footsteps and murmured greetings, the whole of it warm and dim and endlessly deep. At the head of the ministry stood the Minister for Magic, the leader of Wizarding Britain, whose task it was to guide the whole of their government and to answer, in a careful and secret way, to the Muggle Prime Minister who ruled the world above. The Minister for Magic held great responsibility, for beneath that single office spread a vast web of departments, each one given the care of some particular corner of magical life. There were 7 great departments in all, and each hummed along in its own way, filled with witches and wizards who spent their days at desks and in corridors, sorting the endless small matters that a hidden society must somehow manage. One of the largest of these was the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and it was, in many ways, the heart of the ministry's work. Within it labored the aurors, the highly trained witches and wizards whose duty was to hunt down and capture those who used dark magic to harm others. Becoming an auror was no simple thing, for it asked for the very highest marks in school and years of further training besides, and only the most skilled were ever chosen. Alongside the aurors worked the improper use of magic office, which kept a watchful eye on the rules, and the misuse of Muggle artifacts office, which fussed over enchanted teapots and flying carpets and all the other objects that magic was never meant to touch. Together these offices formed the steady, patient force that kept wizarding Britain lawful and calm. There was another department, stranger and quieter than all the rest, called the Department of Mysteries. Those who worked there were known as unspeakables, and they earned that name honestly, for they never spoke of what they studied. Deep in the lowest levels of the ministry, behind a plain black door, they turned their thoughts to the greatest and most puzzling forces of the magical world. They studied time and thought and space and the strange pull of the planets, and in one hidden chamber they studied love itself, which many believed to be the most powerful and most mysterious force of all. It was a place of locked rooms and gentle secrets, and even the other witches and wizards of the ministry could only wonder at what lay within. The ministry also cared for the many creatures who shared the wizarding world, and this was the work of the department for the regulation and control of magical creatures. Here, witches and wizards drew the careful and sometimes difficult lines between beast and being, deciding which creatures were thinking souls and which were animals, and how each should be treated and protected. This department watched over dragons and hippogriffs, over goblins and centaurs and house elves, and over all the countless creatures that hid themselves from Muggle eyes. It was gentle work in its best moments, though it was not always wise or fair, and the story of the wizarding world holds many quiet lessons about the ways such rules could fall short of true kindness. Above all these departments and offices there sat a court, the highest court in wizarding Britain, and it was called the Visengamot. Its members wore robes of plum-colored cloth marked with a silver letter, and they gathered in a deep and shadowed chamber to judge the most serious crimes and to weigh the fate of those accused of dark and dreadful deeds. The Wizengamot was both a court and a kind of council, ancient and solemn, and the head of it was known as the chief warlock. To stand before that gathering was a grave thing indeed, for its word could send a witch or wizard to the darkest prison in all their world. That prison was called Azkaban, and it stood far away upon a tiny island in the cold gray sea of the north, a great stone fortress cut off from every warmth and comfort. What made Azkaban so terrible was not its walls or its distance, but its guards, for it was watched over by the Dementors. The Dementors were among the foulest creatures the wizarding world had ever known, tall and cloaked and gliding, and wherever they drifted, they drew the happiness out of the air itself, leaving nothing behind but cold and despair and the memory of every unhappy thing that had ever happened. To live among them was to feel joy slip slowly away, and so Azkaban was feared above all other places. And here we may see the first shadow upon the ministry's work, for a government that guarded its people with such creatures held within it the seeds of cruelty as well as order. The chief secret that the whole ministry labored to protect was the great law known as the International Statute of Secrecy. Long ago, in troubled centuries when Muggles and witches feared and hurt one another, the wizarding world had chosen to hide itself away entirely, to live unseen alongside the ordinary people rather than beside them in the open. The statute of secrecy bound every witch and wizard to keep their magic hidden, and much of the ministry's daily work flowed from this single, careful promise. It was the reason the offices watched over misused artifacts, the reason memories were sometimes gently smoothed away, the reason the whole hidden world stayed hidden. To keep that secret safe, the ministry watched even the youngest of its people, for the law forbade any witch or wizard under the age of 17 from performing magic outside of school. Upon each young magical person there lay a kind of gentle enchantment called the trace, which allowed the ministry to sense when magic was worked near a child who was still too young to use it freely. A letter would come, polite and firm, reminding the young witch or wizard of the rules and of the reasons behind them. In this way, the ministry tried to raise its children carefully, teaching them that their power was a responsibility as much as a gift. Yet the ministry was never a simple thing, neither wholly good nor wholly wise. In its brightest days, it was a force for order and safety, a steady hand keeping the peace across a whole hidden nation. But in darker times, when fear crept into its corridors and cruel hearts rose to power within it, that same great machine could be turned to frighten and to harm the very people it was meant to protect. A government strong enough to keep a world safe was also strong enough to do it wrong, and the long tale of wizarding Britain would show both faces of the ministry in their turn, the guardian and the tyrant, the shelter and the shadow. And so we leave it for now, glowing quietly beneath the sleeping city, holding its careful secrets in the dark. Up next in Chapter 7, Muggles, Blood, and the Great Prejudice, we'll drift gently into the tender and troubling question of who belonged in the wizarding world and who was pushed aside, and we'll come to understand the soft old sorrows of blood and belonging that shaped so much of the magic to come. Chapter 7. Muggles, Blood, and the Great Prejudice. In the last chapter, the great halls of the Ministry of Magic stretched out before us, all polished floor and softly gliding memos, a place where witches and wizards passed one another with the easy familiarity of people who shared a hidden world. Yet even in that world, so full of wonder and warmth, there ran a quiet fault line, an old and sorrowful idea that some among the magical folk carried in their hearts. And it is to that gentle and thoughtful subject that we now turn, walking softly, the way one walks through a house where a small child has just fallen asleep. For the wizarding world, like every world, had its own words for who belonged and who did not. And those words tell a story that is worth understanding, calmly, and without any need to hurry. To begin, it helps to remember the ordinary word that magical people used for those who had no magic at all. They called them muggles, a soft and rounded word, neither cruel nor kind in itself, simply the name given to the millions upon millions of people who lived their whole lives without ever casting a spell or seeing a broomstick lift into the evening air. A muggle might be a baker or a teacher, a gardener or a builder, entirely unaware that just beyond the edge of their seeing there existed castles and cauldrons and owls carrying letters through the dark. There was nothing lesser about a muggle, nothing wrong or wanting, only a life lived along a different road, and most witches and wizards understood this perfectly well and thought little more about it. Yet within the magical world there had grown up, over many long centuries, a way of speaking about a person's ancestry, about where their magic had come from, and who their parents and grandparents had been. 3 words in particular were used, and it is worth turning each of them over slowly, the way one might turn a smooth stone in the palm of the hand. The first was pure blood, and it described a witch or wizard whose family, as far back as anyone cared to count, had all been magical, with no Muggle grandparents or great-grandparents anywhere along the line. The second was half-blood, and this was by far the most common of all, describing anyone whose ancestry was mixed, perhaps a witch with one magical parent and one Muggle parent, or a wizard whose family tree held a Muggle-born grandmother somewhere among its branches. The third word was Muggle-born, and it belonged to those witches and wizards who had been born to two Muggle parents, arriving in a household with no magic at all, and then, quite unexpectedly and quite wonderfully, discovering that they themselves could do the most extraordinary things. For most people, these three words were simply descriptions, no more troubling than saying that one person had brown eyes and another had blue. A half-blood was not thought better or worse than a pure-blood, and a Muggle-born child receiving a letter of invitation to school was welcomed with the same open arms as any other. But there were some, particularly among a handful of very old and very proud families, who had come to believe something darker, a notion that magical blood was a thing to be kept pure, guarded, kept apart from the Muggle world entirely, as though a family tree with no Muggles in it were somehow finer and more precious than one that had mingled with the ordinary folk beyond the garden wall. These families looked upon their own long lines of magical ancestors with a kind of cold pride, and they looked upon Muggle-born witches and wizards with suspicion, and sometimes with open contempt. It was from this contempt that the ugliest word of all had grown, a slur flung at those who were Muggle-born, a word so unkind that in gentler company it was never spoken aloud. Those who wished to be cruel used it to suggest that a Muggle-born witch or wizard had blood that was somehow dirty or lesser, that they did not truly belong in the magical world at all. It was a small and poisonous word, and the sad truth was that it carried no truth within it whatsoever, for there was not the faintest shred of evidence, not anywhere, that a witch born to Muggle parents was any less gifted, any less powerful, or any less deserving than a witch descended from 1,000 years of wizards. The word was a lie dressed up as a fact, and those who used it revealed far more about the smallness of their own hearts than about the person they aimed it at. Some of these old families, in their pride, kept careful lists of who was and was not truly pure. There was, most famously, a register that came to be known as the Sacred 28, a listing compiled long ago of the 28 families in Britain that were held to be genuinely pure blood, with no Muggle ancestry to be found. To be named among the Sacred 28 was, in the eyes of those who cared about such things, a mark of the highest standing, and the families upon it, names like Black and Malfoy and Knott and Lestrange, wore their inclusion like a badge. Yet even this proud list rested upon a kind of pretending, for in truth almost no family anywhere was wholly free of Muggle blood if one only looked back far enough, and some of the 28 had simply chosen to overlook the Muggles hidden in their own past, or to quietly forget them. The purity they prized so dearly was, in the end, more a story they told themselves than a thing that had ever truly existed. And here we come to the heart of the matter, gently, without raising our voice. This prejudice, this belief that some blood was purer and therefore better, was not built upon any real difference in ability, for no such difference existed. It was built instead upon fear and pride and the old human habit of dividing the world into us and them. Yet from so small and baseless a seed there grew a great deal of sorrow, for it was this very prejudice, more than anything else, that lay at the root of the two great conflicts that would one day tear through the wizarding world. The wars in which some sought to rule over others and to cast out those they deemed unworthy. The pain of those years, which we shall come to in time, did not spring from any true weakness in Muggle-born witches and wizards. It sprang from a lie that some had chosen to believe about them. The kindest and clearest answer to that lie could be found simply by looking at the Muggle-born witches and wizards themselves, at the lives they led, and the magic they wielded. For among the very finest and most gifted magical people who ever lived were many who had been born to Muggle parents. There was Hermione Granger, born to a mother and father who were both dentists, entirely without magic, and yet she grew into one of the cleverest and most talented witches of her whole generation, her mind quick and her spell work sure, outshining a great many who could trace their wizarding blood back through the centuries. And there was Lily Evans, who would one day become Lily Potter, another child of Muggle parents, gentle and bright and beloved, whose skill and whose great capacity for love shaped events far larger than herself. In them, and in countless others like them, the whole foundation of the old prejudice quietly crumbled, for their gifts were plain for anyone to see, and no accident of ancestry could ever explain them away. So we may let this chapter settle softly, holding within it a truth as calm as it is important, that the worth of a witch or wizard was never written in their blood, but only ever in their choices and their courage and their kindness. The wizarding world would learn this lesson slowly and at a heavy cost, and yet the lesson was always there, waiting patiently to be understood. Up next in Chapter 8, Lord Voldemort and the First Wizarding War, we'll drift back through the years to meet the wizard who took the old lie of blood and pride and turned it into something terrible, and we shall follow, softly and without fear, the gathering shadow of that first great conflict, and the quiet, stubborn courage of those who stood against it. Chapter 8. Lord Voldemort and the First Wizarding War. The old fears about blood and purity, the whispered notion that some witches and wizards were worth more than others, did not stay locked away in quiet drawing rooms forever, and in time they gathered themselves into a single terrible shape, into one man who took that poison and made of it a purpose. To understand him, we must go back gently, back before the fear had a name, to a plain gray orphanage in the ordinary world of London, where a boy was born on the last day of December in the year 1926, and where his mother, a poor and broken witch, died within an hour of giving him life. She had asked only that he be called Tom, after the father who had abandoned her, and Marvolo, after her own father, and so the child grew up as Tom Marvolo Riddle, an orphan among orphans, with no one in all the world to hold him. Yet this was no ordinary boy. Even before he knew what he was, strange things gathered around him the way shadows gather at the close of day, small, cruel wonders that frightened the other children and made him proud rather than gentle. When at last a teacher came to tell him that he was a wizard, that a school called Hogwarts had been waiting for him, he felt not wonder but a cold sense that he had always deserved something more than the gray walls he had been given. At Hogwarts, he was sorted into Slytherin, and there he became clever and charming and admired, a favorite of many who never guessed at the emptiness beneath the smile, for he had already begun to believe that ordinary love and ordinary death were beneath him, and that he alone might rise above them. Slowly, across long years, that lonely and gifted boy unmade himself and became something else. He learned the darkest branches of magic that Hogwarts would never willingly teach, and he came to loathe the very name of Riddle, the common Muggle name of the father who had left, and so he wove those letters into a new title, a name meant to be spoken with dread, and called himself Lord Voldemort. He gathered around him a circle of followers, some drawn from the oldest and proudest wizarding families, some drawn simply by the promise of power, and they came to be known as the Death Eaters. Upon the inner arm of each of them he burned a mark, a skull with a serpent coiling from its mouth like a tongue, and this became the Dark Mark, the sign of their belonging, and the summons by which he could call them to his side across any distance. Through the long gray years of the 1970s, his shadow spread across wizarding Britain, and a fear settled over the land that had not been felt in living memory. It was a quiet fear, which made it worse, for it moved through ordinary days. Families sat close together in the evenings and spoke in low voices, wondering which of their friends might not be seen again. People vanished without warning, and some were found, and some were never found at all. And above the houses of the dead there would sometimes hang that green and terrible mark, glowing against the night. Witches and wizards who might have stood against him grew afraid to speak, for they did not know who among their neighbors had already been turned, and the trust that had once bound the community together thinned like mist in the morning. This was the time that later ages would name the First Wizarding War. Though there were no battle lines drawn upon any map, only the slow and creeping terror of a darkness that seemed to have no end and no answer. And yet, even in the deepest part of that long night, something was moving that Voldemort himself could not see. On a wild and stormy evening, a prophecy was spoken, in a dim room above an inn, by a woman who did not remember afterward what she had said. The words told of a child who would be born as the 7th month died, born to those who had thrice defied the Dark Lord. And this child, the prophecy said, would have a power that Voldemort knew not, and in the end neither could live while the other survived. Only part of these words reached Voldemort, carried to him by a listening servant, but that fragment was enough to fill him with a fear he could not name. For the one thing he had always dreaded above all others was an ending, and here at last was the promise of one. There were 2 children who might have fitted the shape of those words, but Voldemort chose to believe it was the son of James and Lily Potter, a young couple who had already defied him more than once and who now hid their small family away for safety. The boy was named Harry, and he was little more than a year old, a child who could not yet walk without holding on, who knew nothing of prophecies or Dark Lords, only the warmth of his mother and the sound of his father's voice. On the night of the 31st of October, in the year 1981, while the ordinary world beyond the wizarding village of Godric's Hollow lit its lanterns and carved its pumpkins for the feast of Halloween, Lord Voldemort came at last to the house where they were hidden. James Potter stood in his way first, and though he had no wand to hand in that moment, he tried to hold the door with nothing but his own body, and he fell. Then Voldemort climbed the stair to the small room where Lily stood before her son's cot, and she too was given a chance to step aside, and she too refused, and she gave her own life gladly rather than move from between the Dark Lord and her child. In her dying she wove, without knowing it, the oldest and deepest magic there is, a protection born purely of love, and it settled over the sleeping boy like an invisible shield. When Voldemort turned his wand upon the child and spoke the curse that had ended so many lives, the curse could not touch him. It rebounded instead upon the one who had cast it, and in a single instant the most feared wizard of the age was torn from his body and cast down, leaving nothing behind but a thin curl of ruined shadow and a small child crying in the dark, marked upon his forehead with a scar in the shape of a bolt of lightning. He was not dead, for he had done such terrible things to himself long before that death could no longer take him wholly. Yet what remained was less than a ghost, weaker than the meanest spirit, a formless thing without body or shape that fled from Godric's Hollow into the wild forests of a far country and there hid itself away. For the long years that followed, he was barely more than a rumor and a memory, unable to touch the world, unable to be seen, waiting with an endless and patient hunger for some chance to grow strong again and to return. And while he waited in the shadows, the wizarding world he had terrorized drew a slow and disbelieving breath and began, tenderly and cautiously, to hope that the long night was over at last, though the wisest among them knew in their hearts that it was only sleeping. Up next in Chapter 9, Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix will drift back to the quiet courage of those who stood against that darkness while it reigned. The great and gentle headmaster who watched over it all, and the secret circle of friends who gathered by candlelight to guard a world that did not always know it was being guarded. Chapter 9. Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix. In the long years when the dark wizard Voldemort spread his shadow across the wizarding world, when fear settled over ordinary homes like a cold fog that would not lift, there was one name spoken softly, gently, as a small warm light against all that darkness, and that name was Albus Dumbledore. He was, by the widest agreement of witches and wizards everywhere, the greatest wizard of the age, and he wore that greatness so lightly, so kindly, that a child meeting him for the first time might have thought only that here was a very old man with a very long silver beard and eyes that seemed to twinkle with some quiet, private amusement. Yet behind that gentleness lay a mind of extraordinary brilliance and a heart of enormous depth, and Voldemort, who feared nothing and no one else in all the world, feared Albus Dumbledore. Dumbledore was the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and it was there, within those ancient stone walls, that he seemed most at home. He walked the corridors of that great castle with the ease of a man who had known it for the better part of a century, first as a boy and a brilliant student, then as a teacher of the study called Transfiguration, and at last as the headmaster who watched over every young witch and wizard who passed through the great oak doors. He knew the moving staircases and the secret passages. He knew the paintings that whispered on the walls and the suits of armor that stood in silent rows. And he seemed to know, too, the quiet worries of the youngest and most frightened of his students. And he had for each of them a word of comfort and a small, unexpected kindness. He was very old, though no one could have said exactly how old, and his life stretched back across a great many years and a great many sorrows. Long, long ago, before Voldemort had risen, before Harry Potter had been born, there had been another dark wizard whose name had made the world tremble, a wizard called Grindelwald, whose ambition and cruelty had cast a terrible shadow across many lands. It was Dumbledore who had faced Grindelwald at last, in a duel that those who spoke of it called one of the greatest ever fought between two wizards, and it was Dumbledore who had won, and who had brought that first darkness to its end. That victory had made his name famous across the whole of the magical world, and yet Dumbledore himself spoke of it, rarely, and when he did, there was in his voice a strange, quiet sadness, as though the memory carried a weight that fame could never lighten. For that was the truth of Albus Dumbledore, hidden beneath the gentle smile and the twinkling eyes. He was a man who carried burdens. He had known loss and grief in his own family, long ago in his youth, wounds that had never fully healed and that he kept folded away in the private places of his heart. He had learned, through his own mistakes and his own sorrows, that great power was a dangerous and lonely thing, and that the wisest use of it was gentleness, patience, and restraint. And so, though he was perhaps the most powerful wizard alive, he never sought to rule, and he turned away, again and again, from the offices and the honors that were pressed upon him, choosing instead to remain simply the headmaster of a school, tending the young the way a careful gardener tends the smallest and most tender of growing things. When Voldemort rose to his full and terrible height, and when the wizarding world seemed to be slipping, night by night, deeper into fear, it was Dumbledore who refused to yield to despair. And it was Dumbledore who gathered around him a company of the brave. This secret society he founded to stand against Voldemort was called the Order of the Phoenix, named for the great crimson bird that could burn away to ashes and rise again renewed. A fitting emblem for those who would not be defeated even in the darkest of days. The Order was not an army, and it had no vast ranks. It was a gathering of ordinary witches and wizards who had chosen, quietly and without reward, to risk everything for the sake of others, meeting in secret, watching over the innocent, and standing between the darkness and those who could not defend themselves. Among the members of that first order were many whose names would come to matter greatly in the story still to unfold. There were James and Lily Potter, young and brave and newly in love, who would one day become the parents of a boy called Harry. There was Sirius Black, bold and loyal and full of laughter, who was James Potter's dearest friend. There was Remus Lupin, gentle and thoughtful and quietly courageous, who carried his own private burden with a rare and patient grace. And there were many others besides, witches and wizards of every kind, who came together in those hard years under Dumbledore's guidance, bound not by fear, but by love, and by the simple, stubborn hope that kindness was worth defending. Some of them would be lost in the long war that followed, and Dumbledore grieved for each of them, remembering their faces long after they were gone. Through all of it, Albus Dumbledore watched over the wizarding world with a patience that seemed almost endless, a patience born of his great age and his great understanding. He saw further than others could see, and he thought in years and in decades where others thought only in days. He understood that some battles could not be won quickly, that some things had to be waited for, tended, and quietly prepared, and that the deepest and most lasting kind of magic was not the kind that struck like lightning, but the kind that grew slowly, like love, and endured. And so, even in the darkest hours, when hope seemed a small and flickering thing, Dumbledore kept his own quiet faith, and by keeping it, he helped others to keep theirs. It was this same long, gentle patience that Dumbledore would one day bring to the guidance of a single small boy. For though the events of the First War would end in sorrow, and though a great many good people would be lost, there would come out of that darkness a child upon whom a strange and heavy destiny had fallen, and Dumbledore, seeing this, would take upon himself the quiet task of watching over that child from a distance, guiding him gently, protecting him without ever seeming to hover too near. Year after year, he would offer a word of wisdom at exactly the moment it was needed, a small nudge in the right direction, a steadying presence in a frightening world, and always with that same warmth, that same unhurried care, that same deep and abiding kindness. And so, as our long story moves toward the boy at its heart, it is a comfort to know that there is such a figure standing quietly in the background, an old and wise protector with a silver beard and twinkling eyes, watching over everything with a love as steady as the turning of the seasons. However dark the nights ahead may seem, however frightening the shadows that gather, Albus Dumbledore is there, patient and gentle and endlessly wise, the one man that even Voldemort feared, keeping his quiet watch over the whole of the wizarding world, and over one small boy in particular, whose story is only just beginning to unfold. Up next in Chapter 10, Harry, Ron, and Hermione will drift softly to a quiet house on an ordinary street, where a baby boy sleeps safe and unknowing beneath the stars, and where the gentlest beginning of the most famous story in all the wizarding world is waiting, warm and calm, to be told. Chapter 10. Harry, Ron, and Hermione. If the wise old headmaster and his quiet order stood as the great guardians watching over the wizarding world from above, then at the very heart of the long story, closer and smaller and warmer, there stood 3 children who would grow into the truest of friends. They were only 11 years old when they first met, ordinary in so many ways, and yet the tale that carried them forward would rest upon their shoulders more than upon any grown witch or wizard alive. Tonight, let the mind settle gently upon these 3, upon Harry and Ron and Hermione, and upon the soft and steady friendship that bound them together through every darkness that would ever come to find them. Harry Potter came first, the boy at the center of it all, the boy who had lived. He had known loss before he had known his own name, for his mother and his father had died when he was only a baby, and he had grown up in a house that did not want him, in a small and dim cupboard beneath a staircase, believing for a long 10 years that he was nothing more than an unwanted and unremarkable child. He did not know that he was famous. He did not know that far away, in villages and cities he had never seen, wizards and witches raised their glasses quietly in his honor. He carried a thin scar upon his forehead, shaped like a stroke of lightning, and it was the only mark he had of a night he could not remember, the night that had made him an orphan and a legend all at once. When Harry learned at last that he was a wizard, and when he stepped for the first time onto the Scarlet Hogwarts Express, he carried with him a great and lonely emptiness, and also a great and hopeful openness. For he had never in his life had a single friend of his own. He was brave, though he did not yet know how brave. He was loyal, though he had never yet been given anyone to be loyal to. And he was kind in a plain and unpolished way, having somehow kept his gentleness through all those unloving years, the way a small green shoot keeps growing even in the poorest and coldest of soils. It was aboard that very train, rattling northward through the soft green hills of the countryside, that Harry met the second of the 3. Ron Weasley slipped into his compartment, because every other seat upon the crowded train seemed already taken, and he sat down across from Harry with freckles upon his nose, and a smudge of dirt upon his cheek, and a rather old and battered set of robes that he had clearly inherited from an older brother. Ron came from a very large family, a family that was warm and loving and cheerfully poor, with 6 sons and 1 small daughter, all crowded together beneath one crooked and happy roof. The Weasleys were pure blood wizards, which meant that magic ran through every branch of their family for many generations back, and yet they had very little gold, and their robes were mended and their books were second-hand and their meals were plain, and none of that mattered even a little, because their home was full to the brim with love. Ron was warm, and he was funny, quick to laugh and quick to grumble, and he wore his feelings openly upon his face, where anyone might read them. He knew a great deal about the wizarding world that Harry did not, and he shared it freely, chattering happily about broomsticks and Quidditch and famous wizards and the strange sweets sold from the trolley that rolled along the swaying corridor of the train. He had grown up with brothers who were older and cleverer and more admired than he, and so he carried within him a quiet worry that he might never be quite enough, a worry that he mostly hid beneath his easy jokes. But from that first ride together, Ron gave Harry something Harry had never once been given before, and it was the simplest and the greatest gift of all. Ron became Harry's very first true friend. The third of the three did not arrive so gently. Hermione Granger came bustling into their compartment, already talking, already correcting, already brimming over with everything she had learned in the short weeks since she had discovered she was a witch. She was Muggle-born, which meant that both of her parents were ordinary people who knew nothing of magic, kind dentists who lived a kind and ordinary life. And so Hermione had come to this hidden world entirely on her own, without a single relative to guide her. And because she had come alone, she had studied twice as hard as anyone else, reading every book from cover to cover, memorizing every spell, determined to prove that she belonged. She had bushy brown hair and rather large front teeth, and a manner so eager and so precise that the two boys did not quite know what to make of her at first. Hermione was brilliant, truly and simply the cleverest witch of her whole year, and she was principled in a deep and unbending way, caring always about what was right and what was fair, even when caring cost her the friendship she so quietly longed for. In those first weeks, she was lonely too, though she hid it beneath a great many facts and a great many rules, and the two boys found her rather difficult, and she found them rather careless, and for a little while it seemed that the three of them might never become friends at all. It took a mountain troll to change that. On the night of the Halloween feast, when a great and dim-witted troll came lumbering into the castle, and Hermione was trapped alone with it in a flooded washroom, not knowing the danger the boys had brought upon themselves, Harry and Ron went back for her. They did not have to. They were only 11, and they were frightened, and the troll was enormous and terrible, but they went back, and together, clumsily and bravely, they knocked the great creature senseless and saved her life. And afterward, when the teachers came, Hermione did a thing that was quite against her nature and told a small untruth to keep the two boys out of trouble, taking the blame upon herself. From that one strange and frightening night, a friendship was forged that nothing in all the years to come would ever break. There are some things, after all, that you cannot share with each other and go on being strangers, and knocking out a full-grown mountain troll is one of them. From that night onward, the three of them belonged together, and the beauty of it lay in how differently each one was made, for where one was weak, another was strong. Harry carried the courage and the quiet steadiness, the willingness to walk straight toward the danger that others fled. Ron carried the warmth and the loyalty and the good humor that kept their spirits from sinking, and a deep knowledge of the wizarding world that his friends leaned upon again and again. And Hermione carried the cleverness, the learning, the careful planning that solved the riddles the other two could never have unraveled alone. Apart, each of them was only a child. Together, they were something far greater than the sum of the three, a single brave and clever and loving whole. Year after year, that friendship would be tested by fear and by danger, and by the slow poison of doubt. And year after year, it would bend and it would strain, and yet it would never truly break. They would quarrel, and they would forgive. They would be parted, and they would find their way back. And in the end, when the darkest hour of all came down upon them, it would be these three, still, standing side by side, who carried the whole long story to its close. Up next, in Chapter 11, 7 Books, 1 Long Story, we'll drift gently through the shape of the tale itself, following the 7 quiet years that carried a boy from the cupboard beneath the stairs all the way to his destiny. Chapter 11, 7 Books, 1 Long Story. By now, Harry, Ron, and Hermione have grown so familiar that it feels as though we have always known them, walking beside them through corridors of stone and firelight. And so tonight, let us do something slow and gentle. Let us step back a little way and look at the whole of their long story from a soft distance, the way a traveler might pause at the top of a low hill and look back over the winding road already walked. There are 7 books in this tale, 1 for each of the 7 years that Harry Potter spent between the wide world he was born into and the wider world that at last claimed him, and each year holds its own shape, its own weather, its own quiet turning. And if we let them pass before us, one by one, unhurried and without any need to hurry, they settle together into a single patient shape, the shape of a boy growing slowly into the man he was always going to be. The first year begins in the smallest of places, in a cupboard under a staircase in an ordinary house on an ordinary street. And it opens outward like a door swinging wide onto morning. In that first year, Harry learns that he is a wizard, learns the name of the school that has been waiting for him all his life, and steps for the first time onto the scarlet train that carries him north. That year is a year of firsts. The first sorting, the first feast, the first flight upon a broom, the first friendships that would last a lifetime, and beneath all of it, quiet as a held breath, there is the matter of a hidden stone, a small and precious thing that could make gold and hold death at bay. It lay guarded deep beneath the castle, tucked behind trials and enchantments, and something in the dark wished very much to reach it. In the end, the 3 friends found their way down through those trials together, and Harry alone stood before the last of them, and the stone was kept safe, and the year closed as gently as it had opened, with the summer waiting beyond the gates. The second year turns upon an older and stranger secret, a chamber built long ago and sealed away, spoken of only in whispers and mostly not believed at all. That year the castle grew uneasy, for something moved unseen through its pipes and its shadows, and one by one certain students were found frozen still as statues, unharmed and yet unreachable, held in a stillness that no one could explain. A hidden chamber had been opened, and within it slept a monster older than living memory, and the mystery of who had opened it and why wound its slow way through the whole of that year. Harry went down at last into the dark beneath the school, into the chamber itself, and there faced both the creature and a memory of the boy who had once been the enemy of them all. And there too a friend was saved, and the year was mended, and the castle breathed easily once more. The third year brought a different kind of shadow, for that was the year of the escape. A prisoner long thought loyal to the darkness had broken free from the fortress that held him, a man named Sirius Black, and the whole of Britain believed him to be hunting Harry across the countryside. To guard the school there came the Dementors, tall and gray and hooded, drifting cold at the edges of the grounds, drinking the warmth and the happiness out of the air wherever they passed. Yet that year the truth turned out to be gentler and sadder than the fear of it. For Sirius Black was no enemy at all, but the truest of friends to Harry's own father, and the year that had begun in dread ended instead in a fragile and unexpected tenderness, a glimpse of family where Harry had thought there was none. The fourth year opened wide and bright, for Hogwarts played host to a great gathering, a tournament of 3 schools and 3 champions, with tasks of dragons and lakes and hedges grown into a living maze. It was meant to be a year of spectacle and celebration, and for a long while it seemed to be exactly that, full of visitors and wonder, and the small ordinary troubles of growing older. Yet beneath the brightness, something patient was working, and at the very end of that year, in a lonely place far from the warmth of the castle, the shadow that had haunted Harry's whole life took shape and stood upright once more. The Dark Lord returned to a body of his own, and the long quiet that had lasted since Harry's infancy came to its end, and the world that had refused for so long to believe was made at last to see. The 5th year is the heaviest of the middle years, a year of closed doors and cold rules. A woman came to the school from the government, soft and smiling and dressed in pink, and beneath that softness she was hard as iron, and one small cruelty at a time she pressed her rule down over everything that had once been warm and free. That year the students learned in secret what they were forbidden to learn openly, gathering quietly to teach one another how to stand and how to hope. And that year ended in sorrow, for in a great and echoing hall of the government itself there came a battle, and in the confusion of its serious black, the godfather Harry had only just begun to know, fell through a veil and was gone, and Harry carried that loss out of the year and into all the years that followed. The 6th year turns inward and grows quieter and more searching, for that was the year of understanding. Harry sat many evenings beside the headmaster, and together they went back through memory into the long life of the enemy, tracing the story of the frightened, hungry boy he had once been. There they came upon the terrible secret at the heart of it, the horcruxes, the pieces of a soul torn apart and hidden away inside ordinary things so that death could never fully take hold. To end the darkness for good, those hidden pieces would each have to be found and destroyed. And that year too ended in grief deeper than any before it, for upon the high tower of the castle, beneath a sky full of stars, Albus Dumbledore himself fell, and the greatest and gentlest protector of them all was taken from the world. The 7th year holds no school at all, or almost none, for it is a year of wandering. Harry, Ron, and Hermione left the castle behind and went out into the wide gray country alone, carrying nothing but one another and the long, hard task the headmaster had left them, the hunt for those hidden fragments of soul. It was a slow year, and a weary one, full of tents pitched in cold woods and quarrels mended and roads that seemed to lead nowhere, and yet one by one the hidden things were found, and one by one they were undone. And at the very last the road led back to where it had begun, to Hogwarts itself, and there in the ruins and the firelight the whole long story gathered into a single night, the Battle of Hogwarts, where everything that had been carried through 7 years was set down at once, and the darkness that had shadowed Harry since before he could remember was met and ended, and the morning came. 7 years, 7 books, and one long story, laid out now like a familiar path seen whole from a quiet hilltop, each turning soft in the distance, each sorrow gentled by knowing that the road went on and led at last to peace. Up next in Chapter 12, Severus Snape and the Question of Loyalty will linger softly beside the most puzzling of all the figures in this tale, and wonder together, without any hurry, whose side he was truly on all along. Chapter 12, Severus Snape and the Question of Loyalty. Of all the many people who lived within the pages of these 7 books, there was perhaps none whose true heart lay so long in shadow, so patiently hidden, as the man named Severus Snape. He was the potions master of Hogwarts, and later, for a time, he taught the subject called defense against the dark arts as well. And he was the head of Slytherin House. And for the great length of Harry's schooling, he wore the same cold and unbending face, a face that seemed to hold nothing but scorn. He was a tall and sallow man, with black eyes and hair the color of coal, and a low, quiet voice that could grow very still and very sharp. And when he swept through the corridors of the castle in his long, dark robes, he moved like a shadow that had learned to walk. For years and years, Harry believed with all his heart that Severus Snape hated him. And in truth, there were reasons enough for a boy to think so. To understand this strange and sorrowful man, one must travel far back before Hogwarts, back to a gray little town where two children once lived not far from each other. There was a young Severus, thin and unloved, and dressed in clothes that never quite fit. A boy who found little warmth in his own home, and there was a young girl named Lily Evans, bright and kind, with dark red hair and green eyes so vivid that they seemed to hold a light of their own. Severus was the one who first told Lily that she was a witch, the one who first spoke to her of the magical world and of the school that waited for them both. And in those early days, before the world had grown hard around them, the two of them were the dearest of friends, walking together beneath the trees, sharing the great secret of what they were. For Severus, that friendship became something deeper than friendship, a love that took root in him quietly and never once let go across all the long years of his life. But love, when it is not returned, can become a very lonely thing to carry. When the two of them came at last to Hogwarts, the Sorting Hat placed Lily in Gryffindor and Severus in Slytherin, and slowly, over the seasons, their paths began to drift apart. Severus fell into the company of those who studied the darker sorts of magic, students who would one day become followers of the wizard, whose name so many feared, while Lily grew close to a group of Gryffindor boys, and one of those boys was James Potter, who would one day become Harry's father. There came a single terrible day when Severus, cornered and shamed, spoke a cruel word to Lily, a word that wounded her deeply, and though he begged and begged for her forgiveness afterward, sitting outside her door through the long hours, she could not any longer be his friend. That wound never healed. It shaped the whole of the rest of his life. And so, carrying his broken heart, Severus Snape went further into the shadows, and in time, he became a Death Eater, one of the followers of Lord Voldemort. It was in this service that he did a thing he would regret to the very end of his days. He overheard a fragment of a prophecy, only a fragment, and he carried it to his dark master, not knowing what it would set in motion. For it was that very prophecy that led Voldemort to mark the Potter family for death. And when Severus understood at last that the woman he had loved since childhood was now in mortal danger because of the words he himself had carried, something inside him broke open and turned. He went, desperate and undone, to Albus Dumbledore, and he begged the old headmaster to protect Lily, to keep her safe, to hide her from what was coming. And Dumbledore, looking upon this ruined man, asked him what he would give in return, and from that night onward Severus Snape belonged, in secret and in silence, to the other side. Voldemort came for the Potters all the same, on that dark night in Godric's Hollow, and Lily died protecting her infant son. When the news reached Severus, his grief was so vast that it seemed to hollow him out entirely. Yet Dumbledore asked one thing more of him, a thing that would demand every ounce of his strength for the rest of his years. He asked Severus to keep the boy safe. He asked him to protect the son of James Potter, the very man he had envied and resented, the living reminder that Lily had chosen another. And Severus agreed, and he kept that promise, though he wrapped it in coldness so that no living soul would ever guess the truth. His love for Lily became a shining thing that took the shape of a silver doe, a Patronus born of purest memory, the same form her own Patronus had once taken, and that doe was the secret sign of a devotion that death itself had not been able to end. For the long years that followed, Severus Snape lived one of the most dangerous lives that any person in these stories ever lived. He became a double agent, a spy who walked a knife's edge between two worlds. To Voldemort, when the Dark Wizard rose again, he pretended to be a faithful servant returned to the fold, and he sat among the Death Eaters and spoke their language and kept their trust. To Dumbledore, in truth, he gave his true loyalty, passing along what he learned, working always toward the enemy's undoing. Neither side ever fully trusted him. The good could not forget that he had once worn the dark mark, and the wicked could not be entirely certain where his heart truly lay. And so he stood alone, in between, believed by almost no one, protected by nothing but his own iron discipline and the great gift he possessed for hiding his mind from those who would read it. And all the while, hidden behind that mask of scorn, he watched over Harry. When a jinxed broom nearly threw the boy to his death in his very first year, it was Snape who murmured the countercharm that kept him in the air, even as it seemed to everyone that he was the one casting the curse. Again and again, in ways Harry never saw and never suspected, the sharp-tongued potions master turned aside the dangers that gathered around the son of Lily Evans. He did it without thanks. He did it without any hope that the boy would ever understand. He did it because he had made a promise, and because the memory of a pair of green eyes, the same green eyes that now looked out from Harry's face, would not release him. The truth of Severus Snape came at last only at the moment of his death, when there was no more time left for hiding. As his life ran out of him, he gave to Harry a gift of silver memories. A stream of his own past poured out at the very end, and Harry carried those memories into the great stone basin and looked upon them and saw everything. He saw the lonely boy and the red-haired girl beneath the trees. He saw the grief in Godric's Hollow. He saw the doe of silver light and the long, unbroken years of a hidden and faithful heart. And Harry understood then that the man he had believed to be his enemy had in truth been protecting him all along, guarding him from the shadows out of a love that had never wavered, a loyalty that had been true from the very beginning to the very end. Up next, in Chapter 13, The Horcruxes and the Fear of Death, we'll drift gently into the darkest of Voldemort's secrets, the shattered pieces of a soul hidden away in silence. And we'll wander softly through the long and patient search that Harry and his friends must one day undertake to bring those hidden fragments into the light. Chapter 13, The Horcruxes and the Fear of Death. In the last chapter, we walked slowly through the long-shadowed life of Severus Snape, the man who wore coldness like a heavy winter cloak, the man whose truest feelings lay folded quietly beneath years of pretended cruelty, and we let his story settle over us like the last gray light of a fading afternoon. Now, as the night deepens further and the world outside the window grows softer and more still, we turn toward one of the darkest and yet strangely quietest corners of this whole long tale. A corner told not with fright, but with the calm distance of an old story remembered from very far away. And we speak now of the Horcruxes and of the terrible fear of death that gave them their beginning. To understand a Horcrux, we must first understand a truth that lives at the heart of all magic, which is that even the greatest witches and wizards, for all their power over fire and flight and transformation, remain mortal creatures who must one day come to the natural end of their days. Death is woven into the fabric of the world, gentle in its inevitability, and most who lived within that world made a quiet peace with it, understanding that a life is precious precisely because it does not last forever. Yet there was one wizard who could not and would not accept this quiet truth, one wizard whose whole spirit recoiled from the very idea of ending, and that wizard was Lord Voldemort. From his earliest years, even when he was still a boy named Tom Marvolo Riddle, growing up in a gray orphanage far from the magical world, he had feared death more than anything else that existed. Where others saw death as a natural passage, he saw only a black door that must never be allowed to open. And so, as he grew and learned and delved ever deeper into forbidden knowledge, he began to search for a way to place himself entirely beyond death's reach. It was in this searching that he came upon the darkest of all magics, older than Hogwarts itself, spoken of only in the most secret and forbidden of books, the magic of the horcrux. A horcrux is a thing almost too strange and too terrible to hold in the mind, and yet its idea is a simple one told plainly. It is an object, any object at all, into which a dark wizard has hidden a fragment of his own soul. The soul, in the old understanding of magic, is meant to remain whole and unbroken within a person, a single quiet flame. But there exists one act so violent and so unnatural that it tears the soul apart, and that act is murder. When one person takes the life of another, the soul is rent, split along a deep and lasting wound, and it is this torn piece that a dark wizard may then, through a spell so foul that few books will even name it, seal away inside a chosen object. And once that fragment of soul rests safely hidden within its vessel, the wizard cannot truly die, for even if his body is destroyed, a part of him remains anchored to the living world, unable to pass on, waiting in the dark for a chance to return. This was the secret that Lord Voldemort embraced, and here we come to the thing that made him so unlike any dark wizard who had ever lived before him. For those few who had ever dared to make a horcrux at all had made only one, understanding that even a single splitting of the soul was a monstrous violence against the natural order. But Voldemort, in his boundless terror of death and his cold hunger for permanence, conceived a plan that no one before him had ever dared to imagine. He resolved to split his soul, not once, but again and again, until it was divided into 7 pieces, for 7 was the most powerful of magical numbers, and he believed that a soul divided into 7 parts would make him stronger and safer than any being had ever been. And so, across the long years of his rise, he chose his vessels with great and careful pride, for he did not wish to hide his soul in worthless things. He took a diary from his own school days, a plain black book that held the memory of his younger self. He took a ring that had belonged to his mother's family, the ancient and broken line of Slytherin's descendants, a ring set with a heavy black stone. He took a golden locket that had once belonged to Salazar Slytherin himself, and a small golden cup that had belonged to the gentle founder Helga Hufflepuff, treasures of the old school that he coveted for their history and their power. He took a lost diadem, a delicate silver crown once worn by Rowena Ravenclaw, hidden away for centuries in a forgotten room. And in his later years, he made a horcrux of a living thing, of his great serpent Nagini, who moved always at his side through the shadows. Yet the story holds one more vessel, and it is perhaps the strangest of all, for it was made entirely by accident and without his knowing. On the night that Voldemort came to the house in Godric's Hollow, on the night his killing curse turned back upon him and tore his body away, his soul was already so broken and so unstable that a final fragment split free in that very moment and fastened itself, unbidden and unnoticed, to the only living thing left in the room. That living thing was the infant boy, Harry Potter. And so the child himself, without ever choosing it, and without any soul of his own being touched, became a seventh vessel, carrying within him a hidden splinter of the very wizard who had tried to kill him. A secret that would sleep quietly inside him for many long years. All of this together made Lord Voldemort very nearly impossible to destroy, for so long as even a single one of these vessels survived somewhere in the world, he could not truly die. His enemies might strike down his body 100 times over, and still he would linger, a torn and waiting thing, ready to be pulled back into flesh. His safety was scattered across the world in objects of gold and silver and leather and scale, hidden in caves and vaults and forgotten rooms, and only someone who knew this deepest secret could ever hope to end him for good. And there was one who came to know it. The old headmaster Albus Dumbledore, patient and clever, spent many years piecing together the truth of what Voldemort had done, gathering the scattered clues of a long and secret life, until at last he understood the full and terrible shape of the 7 pieces. And to the boy Harry, together with his 2 most faithful friends, the loyal Ron Weasley and the clever Hermione Granger, fell the long and lonely task that this understanding demanded. They were to find each of the hidden vessels, one by one, and to destroy each one utterly, so that the torn soul held within could be unmade, and Voldemort could at last be made mortal again. It was a quest that led them far from the warm halls of Hogwarts, out into cold forests and empty countryside, into a hidden lake in a dark cave, into the deep marble vaults beneath the Wizarding Bank, and into the oldest and most secret rooms of the castle itself. Each vessel was guarded in its own way, and each one, when the moment came to destroy it, seemed almost to fight back, whispering and clutching at the hearts of those who dared to unmake it. Yet slowly, across a long and weary year, the pieces of that divided soul were found and undone, until the great dark wizard who had feared death above all things was drawn, thread by thread, back toward the very ending he had tried so hard to escape. And so we let this story rest for now, gently, the way one sets down a heavy book at the close of a long day. The fear of death had led one wizard to break his own soul into pieces, and the mending of the world would require that each of those pieces be found and quietly laid to rest. Up next in Chapter 14, the Deathly Hallows and the Master of Death will drift together into an old and gentle legend of 3 brothers and 3 enchanted gifts, and will wander softly toward the deeper truth about what it means to truly master death. So let your breathing slow and your thoughts grow soft as we go. Chapter 14. The Deathly Hallows and the Master of Death there is a story older than most in the wizarding world. A story that mothers and fathers have told their sleepy children for hundreds of years. A story that begins not with a spell or a battle, but with a long, lonely road and 3 travelers walking beneath a slowly darkening sky. It is called The Tale of the 3 Brothers, and it is at once a bedtime story, a legend, and something quieter still, something like a lesson carried down the generations wrapped in the soft cloth of a fairy tale. Long after the hunting of the horcruxes had drawn to its close, this older story rose again into the light, and it turned out that the 2 tales were bound together in ways that few had ever imagined. Once, so the tale goes, there were 3 brothers who set out upon a journey at twilight, walking together along a winding, lonely road. In time they came to a river too deep to wade across, and too dangerous to swim, and its dark waters ran cold and swift beneath the fading evening. The 3 brothers, being learned in magic, simply raised their wands and waved them, and a fine bridge appeared across the treacherous water. Yet before they could cross, a hooded figure rose up before them upon the bridge, and this figure was Death himself. Death felt cheated, for travelers usually drowned in that river, and the 3 brothers, with their cleverness, had slipped away from him. But Death was cunning, and he pretended to be pleased, and he told the 3 brothers that each of them had earned a prize for having been so clever as to evade him. The oldest brother, who was a combative man, asked for a wand more powerful than any in existence, a wand that must always win duels for its owner, a wand worthy of a wizard who had conquered death. And so Death crossed to an elder tree upon the banks of the river. And from a branch that hung there he fashioned a wand and gave it to the oldest brother. Then, the second brother, who was an arrogant man, decided that he wished to humble Death still further, and he asked for the power to recall others from the world beyond. And so Death picked up a small stone from the riverbank and gave it to the second brother, and told him that the stone would have the power to bring back the dead. Then Death turned to the third and youngest brother, who was a humble man, and the wisest of the 3, and the youngest brother did not trust Death at all. And so he asked for something that would allow him to leave that place without being followed by Death. Reluctantly, Death handed over his own cloak of invisibility, a cloak that could hide the one who wore it even from the eyes of Death himself. And so the 3 brothers went on their separate ways, each carrying his gift. The oldest brother traveled to a distant village, and there, with the unbeatable wand in his hand, he boasted of its power and settled an old quarrel by striking down a wizard he had once fought. But that night, as he lay sleeping and full of wine, another crept in and stole the wand from him and cut his throat, and so Death took the oldest brother for his own. The second brother went home to his house, alone, and there he turned the stone 3 times in his hand. And to his amazement and his joy, the girl he had once hoped to marry, who had died before their wedding, appeared before him. Yet she was silent and cold and distant, separated from him as though by a veil, for she did not truly belong among the living, and she was sorrowful to be there. And so, driven at last to madness by hopeless longing, the second brother took his own life to join her, and Death took the second brother too. But though Death searched for many long years, he could never find the third and youngest brother, for the youngest brother kept the cloak of invisibility wrapped about him and stayed hidden and safe. Only when he had grown very old did the youngest brother at last take off the cloak of invisibility, and he gave it to his own son, and then he greeted Death as an old friend, and went with him gladly, and the 2 of them departed from this life as equals. That is how the tale of the 3 brothers ends, softly and without fear, and for a very long time, most who heard it thought it nothing more than a story meant to teach children not to be greedy or proud. Yet within the wizarding world, there were some who came to believe that the 3 gifts were real, that they had once truly existed, and perhaps existed still. They called these 3 treasures the Deathly Hallows, and they gave to each a name. The wand of the oldest brother they called the Elder Wand, the most powerful wand ever made, said to have passed down through the long centuries from hand to hand, often stolen, often won in blood, leaving a trail of ruin behind it. The stone of the second brother they called the Resurrection Stone, the stone that could call back a shadow of those who had died and draw them near, gentle and grieving, across the boundary between the living and the dead. And the cloak of the youngest brother they called the Cloak of Invisibility, the truest of all such cloaks, one that never faded and never failed, one that could hide its wearer forever, even from death. Those few who believed in the hallows believed also in something more, something that gave the legend its deepest pull, for it was said that whoever came to possess all three of the hallows at once, the unbeatable wand and the summoning stone and the hiding cloak together, would become the master of death. This was the great and secret hope that drew certain seekers on through the years, the dream of gathering the three treasures and standing, at last, beyond the reach of the ending that comes for all things. And here the old fairy tale bent quietly back toward the true history of the wizarding world. For the three brothers of the story had once been real, and their true name was Peverell. Antioch, Cadmus, and Ignotus Peverell had lived long ago, three gifted brothers whose deeds had passed slowly out of memory and into legend and fable. The youngest, Ignotus Peverell, the humble one who had walked away hidden beneath the cloak, had handed that cloak down to his son, and his son to his own child after him, and so on through many quiet generations. And the cloak passed at last, through that long, unbroken line of descendants, into the hands of a boy named Harry, who was himself a distant grandson of Ignotus, the youngest of the three brothers. The very cloak that Harry had been given, the cloak that had wrapped him warm and unseen through so many nights, was the true third hallow, older and stranger than anyone had ever guessed. Yet the deepest truth of all lay not in the treasures themselves, but in the meaning hidden within the tale, soft as a whispered secret. For the youngest brother had never tried to conquer death, nor to cheat him, nor to command the dead to return. He had asked only to walk his own road in peace, and when his long life was done, he had met death without terror, as one greets an old and trusted companion at the end of a journey. And so the real master of death, the story gently teaches, is not the one who seizes power over it, nor the one who refuses ever to let it come. The true master of death is the one who understands that death is not something to be fought and defeated, but something to be accepted, calmly and without fear, when its proper time arrives. To accept the ending, to let go softly when the hour comes, is the only mastery there has ever truly been. Up next in Chapter 15, the creatures of the wizarding world will wander gently together through the hidden forests and the quiet waters and the shadowed places where the magical beasts of this world make their homes, and will meet the gentle and the wild alike as the night deepens softly around us. Chapter 15. The creatures of the wizarding world, when the last of the deathly hallows had settled back into legend, and the story of the wand and the stone and the cloak had drifted softly to its close. The world of magic remained, quiet and vast, filled with far more than wizards and witches alone. For beyond the castle walls and the crooked houses and the winding cobbled streets, there lived a great and gentle company of beings and beasts, some small and shy, some enormous and slow, each of them woven into the fabric of this hidden world in ways that the ordinary people beyond it would never come to know. And so, as the fire burns low, and the night draws its blanket over everything, it is a fitting time to wander slowly among them, to visit each in turn, and to let their strangeness and their wonder soothe the mind towards sleep. Among the first of these were the house elves, small creatures with large round eyes and thin bat-like ears, who had lived alongside wizarding families for longer than anyone could remember. They stood no taller than a young child, and they wrapped themselves in pillowcases or old tea towels, for a house elf who served an ancient family was bound to that family by a magic older than memory, and could only be set free if its master gave it clothing. Most elves knew no other life and wished for none, taking a deep and quiet pride in their labor, cooking and cleaning in the great kitchens beneath the castle, tending the fires, and moving unseen through the halls. Yet even within this old and gentle bondage there beat hearts capable of the most astonishing love and courage. One such elf was named Dobby, who belonged for many long years to a proud and cruel family, and who longed with all his small being for freedom and for friendship. When at last a kind young wizard tricked that cruel master into handing Dobby a single sock, the little elf was freed, and he wept with joy, and he wore mismatched socks and a tea cozy for a hat, and he chose to work for wages which no elf had ever wished to do before. Dobby loved that young wizard more than his own safety, and in the end he gave his life to carry his friends away from danger, dying with a soft smile upon his face, a free elf to the very last. Deep beneath the streets of the city, in the marble halls of the wizarding bank called Gringotts, there lived the goblins, a clever and ancient people with long fingers and sharp, knowing faces. They were master craftsmen and keepers of gold, and they ran the great bank with careful precision, guiding wizards down through tunnels of cold stone in little carts that rattled through the dark. The goblins had their own ideas about ownership and honor, believing that a thing belonged always to the one who made it, and their history with wizards had not always been peaceful. Yet in their vaults they guarded fortunes and treasures behind enchantments so deep that no thief could pass, and their skill at forging silver and gold and enchanted metal was without equal in all the world. Out in the forbidden forest, beneath the tall and whispering trees, roamed the centaurs, proud beings with the upper bodies of men and the lower bodies of horses. They were creatures of the wild and the open sky, and they cared little for the affairs of wizards, preferring to read the future in the slow turning of the stars and the movements of the planets. The centaurs kept to themselves, galloping through the deep green shadows, wise and watchful, and slow to trust, and they spoke of great patterns written across the heavens, patterns that unfolded over centuries and cared nothing for the small worries of a single passing night. Among the beasts of that same forest, and of the wider world, were the hippogriffs, magnificent creatures with the front half of a great eagle and the back half of a horse. They had cruel curved beaks and enormous feathered wings and fierce orange eyes, yet they were also proud and courteous, and any who wished to approach one had first to bow low and wait, unmoving, until the hippogriff chose to bow in return. One such creature was named Buckbeak, a gray and gleaming hippogriff who allowed a brave young wizard to ride upon his back, soaring high above the lake with the wind rushing cool and clean, and who later, in a moment of great need, carried a wrongly condemned man away into the freedom of the night sky. Stranger and more shadowed than these were the thestrals, winged horses with skeletal black bodies and leathery wings, gentle and patient creatures who pulled the carriages up to the castle each year, yet they carried a secret, for the thestrals could only be seen by those who had truly looked upon death and understood it. To everyone else, the carriages seemed to move along by themselves, drawn by nothing at all, and so most students never knew the quiet creatures were there. Those who could see them found them not frightening but calm, dark and mild-eyed, drawn to loyalty. able to find any place their rider wished to go. There were dragons, too, the greatest and most fearsome of all the magical beasts, enormous scaled creatures that breathed fire and guarded their hordes with jealous fury. They came in many kinds, from the black-scaled Hungarian horntail to the silver-blue Swedish short snout, and they were so dangerous that only the bravest and most skilled keepers dared to tend them, working in teams upon high mountain reserves. And in the deepest vaults of Gringotts itself there lived one pale and ragged dragon, kept for long ages in the darkness to guard the treasures of the goblins, until at last it was freed and rose up through the roof of the bank and flew away toward distant hills and open water. Gentler by far was the phoenix, a bird of scarlet and gold, with a long, sweeping tail and eyes like black beads of light. A phoenix lived a very long life, and when its time came at last, it burst into flame and crumbled into a small heap of soft gray ash, and from that ash a tiny new phoenix was reborn, so that the bird never truly died but rose again and again through the endless turning of the years. The tears of a phoenix could heal even the deepest wounds, and its song brought courage to the pure of heart and dread to the wicked. One such bird was named Fawkes, who belonged to the wise old headmaster of the castle, and who once flew to the aid of a young wizard in a moment of terrible peril, carrying a hat and a sword and healing tears and unshakable loyalty. Nearer to the ordinary comforts of wizarding life were the owls, patient and clever birds who carried letters and parcels across great distances, gliding through the night on silent wings. Nearly every wizarding family kept one, and the birds nested in a high stone tower at the school, hooting softly among the rafters. One especially beautiful owl was a snowy white bird named Hedwig, who belonged to a young wizard and became his truest companion through many lonely summers, nipping his fingers with affection, watching him with steady amber eyes, and flying faithfully to him across the miles whenever he had need of a friend. And greatest of all in size were the giants, towering beings taller than houses, who had once lived in great numbers among the mountains, but had dwindled over the long years to only a scattered few. They were slow and simple and easily angered, living rough and wandering lives in the high cold places of the world, far from the towns of wizards and ordinary people alike. Yet not every giant was fierce and wild, for there had been unions between giants and wizards, and from one such joining came a great gentle half-giant named Hagrid, who stood nearly twice the height of a man, with a wild black beard and a heart as warm as a summer hearth. Hagrid loved every creature, however dangerous, and he made his home in a small wooden hut at the edge of the forest, keeper of the keys and the grounds, a giant among small folk who had found, at last, the place where he truly belonged. Up next in Chapter 16, Quidditch and the Ordinary Days at School, we'll drift together through the sunlit fields and the everyday rhythms of castle life, the flying game upon its slender broomsticks, the lessons and the meals and the quiet ordinary hours, all of it turning gently on, soft and slow, while you rest. Chapter 16, Quidditch and the Ordinary Days at School Beyond the Shadowed Forests, and the gentle marvels of magical creatures that filled the last of our wandering, there lived at Hogwarts a warmth of a very different kind. A warmth made not of danger or of wonder, but of the small and steady rhythms of ordinary days. And it is into that soft and settled world that we now drift, letting our thoughts slow and settle as we go. For all the great and terrible things that gathered around the school as the years turned, there remained through it all the simple pleasures of a young life lived among friends, the lessons and the meals, the games and the laughter, the long quiet evenings by the fire, And among the very brightest of these pleasures there shone the beloved wizarding sport of Quidditch, played high in the open air upon flying broomsticks beneath the drifting clouds. Quidditch was the game that stirred the hearts of witches and wizards young and old, a sport so old and so cherished that it seemed to belong to the very bones of the wizarding world, and it was played by 2 teams of 7 players each, who rose upon their broomsticks into the sky above a great oval pitch ringed with towering stands. 3 of those 7 players were called chasers, and it was their task to carry and to pass a large red ball known as the quaffle, weaving it between them through the air and striving to send it soaring through one of 3 tall golden hoops that stood at either end of the field. Each time the quaffle passed cleanly through a hoop, the team that had thrown it earned 10 points. And so the chasers darted and circled and traded the ball back and forth in graceful arcs, their robes rippling gently as they flew. Guarding those 3 golden hoops was a single player called the keeper, who hovered watchfully before them and tried, with outstretched hands and quick, sure turns of the broom, to stop the quaffle from slipping through, so that for every clever chaser who sought to score there stood a patient keeper who sought to defend, and the 2 of them played their quiet contest high above the grass. And moving through all of this, weaving danger into the graceful dance, came 2 heavy black balls, known as the bludgers, which flew about the pitch entirely on their own, swerving and diving as though they carried some restless will, seeking always to knock the players from their brooms. To guard against them, each team kept 2 beaters, and these players carried short, stout bats with which they struck the bludgers away, sending them spinning off toward the other side, protecting their friends and troubling their foes in equal measure. There remained then 1 more player upon each team, and 1 more ball, and these 2 were bound together in the loveliest and most important part of the whole game, for the last player was the seeker, and the ball the seeker chased was the golden snitch. The snitch was a tiny ball of glimmering gold, no larger than a walnut, and it had 2 small silver wings with which it flew, and it moved so swiftly and so cleverly that it was very hard indeed to see, flickering into sight for the briefest moment before vanishing again into the wide blue air. The seeker's task was to fly above the tumult of the game, searching and watching and waiting, until at last the little winged ball revealed itself, and then to chase it through the sky with every ounce of skill and daring. For whichever seeker closed a hand about the golden snitch won for their team 150 points, and brought the whole game to its end. So it was that 4 balls flew together above the pitch. The great red quaffle passed among the chasers, the 2 dark bludgers hurtling wildly about, and the small bright snitch flitting quietly at the edges of it all. And around them the 7 players of each team moved in their appointed roles, the chasers weaving, the keeper guarding, the beaters swinging, and the seeker forever watching the sky. It was a game of speed and grace and gentle courage, and to those who loved it there was scarcely a finer way to spend a bright cold afternoon than seated in the wooden stands, wrapped in scarves of house colors, watching the players sweep and turn against the clouds. At Hogwarts, each of the 4 houses kept its own team: the brave of Gryffindor, the clever of Ravenclaw, the loyal of Hufflepuff, and the cunning of Slytherin. And through the long months of the school year, these 4 teams met one another upon the pitch, in match after match, each striving to win the great silver Quidditch Cup that was awarded at the season's end to the house whose team had triumphed. The matches were among the most joyful days of the whole calendar, for the entire school would gather to watch, cheering for their own and marveling at fine flying, and afterward the winning house would return to its common room to celebrate long into the evening, with sweets and laughter and warm, contented pride. It was into this cherished game that young Harry Potter first flew, and he came to it in a most remarkable way. For he was only 11 years old, newly arrived at the school, when his rare and natural gift upon a broomstick was noticed, and he was chosen to play as seeker for the Gryffindor team. So young a player had not joined a house team in a very long while indeed. And Harry became one of the youngest seekers in a century, rising into the sky with a talent that seemed to have been waiting in him all along, his eyes quick to catch the golden flicker of the snitch, his hands sure upon the broom. And though he had come from a childhood with little joy in it, upon the pitch he found something that felt like belonging, a place where he could soar and be simply himself among his friends. Yet Quidditch, for all its brightness, was but one thread woven into the wider tapestry of ordinary school life. And it was in that gentle, everyday world that Hogwarts became, for so many, a true and lasting home. There were the lessons that filled the days, the waving of wands and the murmur of new spells, the careful mixing of potions in the cool stone dungeons, the tending of magical plants in the warm, damp greenhouses, and the study of the stars from the high astronomy tower beneath the wheeling night sky. There was homework too, long rolls of parchment to be filled by candlelight in the library or beside the common room fire, and though the students grumbled at it in the friendly way of all young people, it gave a comforting shape and order to the passing weeks. There were the great feasts in the hall, where the long tables filled themselves with more good food than could ever be eaten, and thousands of candles floated in the air above, and the enchanted ceiling showed the true sky wheeling softly overhead. And on those evenings, the whole school sat together in golden light and easy contentment. And now and then, when the older students were granted leave, there were trips down to the little village of Hogsmeade, the only holy wizarding village in all of Britain, with its crooked snow-topped roofs and its cheerful shops full of sweets and quills and warm butterbeer, a place of simple, happy wandering on cold, bright afternoons. But dearest of all, more than the sport and the lessons and the feasts, there were the friendships, the warm and steady bonds between young hearts that turned a castle of stone into a place of belonging, the loyalty of friends who studied side by side and laughed together and stood beside one another through every ordinary and extraordinary day. It was these gentle things, the games and the meals and the quiet companionship, that made Hogwarts feel so deeply like home, and it is a comforting thought to carry with us now into the softness of rest. Up next, in Chapter 17, The Battle of Hogwarts, we'll gather these threads of friendship and courage and follow them into the great and final defense of the castle, told softly and slowly, so that even its gravest hours may pass before you like a calm and gentle dream. Chapter 17. The Battle of Hogwarts. There comes a night at the very end of the long story, when everything that has been carried for 7 years finally arrives at the one place where it all began, and that place is the castle, and the night is the last night of the war. It was the spring of 1998, and the great school of Hogwarts, which had stood upon its hillside through so many quiet centuries of snowfall and starlight, was about to become the ground upon which the whole of the tale would gently come to rest. Harry had returned to the castle in the darkness, weary and thin, and certain at last of what he had come to do. And Ron and Hermione had come with him, as they had always come with him, and behind the three of them the ancient stones seemed to breathe and to wait. The war had come to Hogwarts because Voldemort had learned that Harry was there, and because the last of the pieces of his broken soul, the hidden things called horcruxes, into which he had folded fragments of himself in his hunger to never die, were being sought out and undone one by one. And so the dark forces gathered in the hills beyond the lake, patient and cold in the deep of the night, while inside the castle a different sort of gathering had begun, quieter and far more tender, of everyone who had chosen to stay and to stand. They came from every corner of the school and from every year of its memory. The students who were old enough to fight came down through the corridors in their nightclothes and their robes, and the teachers came from their towers, gentle Professor McGonagall with her tartan dressing gown and her steady heart, and old Professor Slughorn, and tiny Professor Flitwick, who knew more of charms than almost anyone living. The members of the Order of the Phoenix came through the secret passages. Lupin and Tonks and Kingsley and the many Weasleys, Arthur and Molly, and their grown children, who had grown up alongside Harry as though he had always been one of their own. And from the little village of Hogsmeade, down the hidden tunnel that ran beneath the earth, came the shopkeepers and the neighbors and the ordinary witches and wizards who had decided that this school was worth defending, so that the great hall filled softly with the shuffle of many feet and the low murmur of people making ready. Professor McGonagall walked the length of the castle and woke the stone itself to its own defense. She sent the suits of armor clanking down from their alcoves to stand in ranks, and she summoned the great stone guardians from the walls to march to the courtyards, and all across the school the old enchantments rose like a tide, so that a shimmering shield of protection stretched over the towers and the turrets and closed the castle in a dome of light against the gathering dark. The younger children, those too small to fight, were led away through the passages to safety, and the older ones took up their places at the windows and the walls, and a great and solemn hush settled over everything. The hush of people who love a place and mean to stand between it and the night. Then the darkness broke against the shield. The forces of Voldemort pressed in from the grounds, and giants moved among the trees, and the enchanted armor of the castle went out to meet them in the courtyards, and for a long while the school became a place of running, and of shielding, and of light thrown against light. Yet the tale never lingers on the cruelty of it, for what mattered most was not the noise of the fighting, but the quiet courage of the ones who gave themselves to it. And even as the walls trembled, the deeper work went on beneath, for Ron and Hermione had gone down into the ancient chamber far below the castle, and had found there a way to unmake one of the hidden horcruxes, and Harry and his friends found another in the room of requirement, high above. And so one by one the last fragments of the Dark Lord's soul were quietly undone, each one a little more of his false immortality slipping away into the dark. There is no gentle way to say that in that long night many who were loved did not live to see the morning. And yet, it must be said softly, the way one speaks of those who have gone to sleep and will not wake. Some who had laughed in the corridors only a season before were lost among the falling stone, and a young husband and his young wife, who had a baby waiting for them at home, lay down at the end of the fighting side by side, and a brother among the many Weasley brothers, one of the bright and merry twins who had filled the school with laughter, was among those who fell. They were mourned in the great hall, as the fighting drew its breath, laid in gentle rows, while those who loved them knelt beside them, and the whole castle seemed to grieve with them. For they had given everything they had, and their giving was not in vain. And then came the moment toward which the whole story had always been quietly moving. For Harry learned at last the final truth of the horcruxes, that there was one last piece of Voldemort's soul that had lodged, long ago and unknowing, within Harry himself on the night his parents died, and that so long as it remained the Dark Lord, could not truly be ended. And so Harry understood, with a calm that came over him like the falling of evening, that he must go out to meet his fate. He walked alone out of the castle and down across the grounds toward the dark trees of the forest, and he did not run, and he did not fight, but walked as one walks toward sleep, and he carried with him the memory of all those who had loved him, so that he did not feel alone, even in the loneliest walk that anyone has ever taken. In the heart of the forest, Voldemort was waiting, and there Harry gave himself up without raising his hand, and the curse fell, and for a while there was a great and gentle stillness. But that stillness was not the end of Harry, for the peace of the Dark Lord's soul that had hidden in him was undone by that very curse, and Harry, who had walked willingly to meet death for the sake of everyone he loved, was allowed to return. He came back to himself as though rising from a deep and dreamless rest, and he kept still and hidden while he was carried back toward the castle, biding the last quiet moment. And so the tale came to its dawn. As the first pale light crept over the hills, the last struggle gathered itself in the great hall, and Harry rose up, living before them all. And it was seen at last that the Dark Lord had been undone from within, that every hidden fragment of his soul was gone, and that he was mortal now, as any man is mortal. When the final curse leapt from Voldemort's wand, it met the simple, disarming charm that Harry raised against it, and because of an old and quiet truth about which wand truly belonged to whom, the dark curse turned in the air and rebounded upon the one who cast it, so that Voldemort fell at last by his own hand at the coming of the morning. And then it was over, truly and gently over, and the sun came up over Hogwarts as it had come up over all its quiet centuries, and the great enemy was simply gone, like a shadow that fades when the lamp is lit. The survivors gathered in the light of that new day, weary beyond telling and grieving for those they had lost, and yet held together by the deep and simple peace of a thing that has finally been finished. The castle stood, wounded but standing, and the war was ended, and the long story that had begun with a baby left upon a doorstep had come round at last to a quiet and rightful close. Up next in Chapter 18, What the Films Left Out of the Books. We'll drift gently back through the whole tale once more, and notice, without hurry, the small hidden moments and quiet corners of the story that were folded away when it was carried from the page onto the screen. Chapter 18. What the films left out of the books when the last spell had faded over the ruined stones of Hogwarts, and the castle had begun the slow work of healing itself. Many who loved the story turned back to the beginning, to read it all once more by the soft light of a bedside lamp. And in that reading they found something quiet and comforting, which is that the tale is larger than any single telling of it. The 8 films, beautiful as they were, could hold only so much within their hours, and so a great deal of the 7 books had to be gently set aside, folded away like extra pages in a drawer, waiting for anyone who wished to return and find them. On this calm night, near the end of our long journey together, let us wander through some of those quiet rooms that the films could not enter, and remember how much richer and fuller the written story truly is. The first of these missing figures is a small and mischievous spirit named Peeves, a poltergeist who drifted through the corridors of Hogwarts for as long as anyone could remember. He was not a ghost, for ghosts had once been living, and Peeves had never lived at all. He was instead a bundle of chaos and laughter, floating just below the ceilings, dropping walking sticks onto unsuspecting heads, tipping over suits of armor, and blowing rude noises down the long stone hallways. Only the caretaker Argus Filch and the Bloody Baron could ever truly frighten him into stillness. In the books, he is everywhere, a constant thread of harmless disorder, and in the final battle, he even hurled Snargaluff pods and other strange things down upon the invaders, while singing a cheerful little victory song of his own invention. Yet in all 8 films, he never once appears, and so many who watched them never knew that Hogwarts kept its own resident spirit of gentle troublemaking, floating quietly overhead through every year of the story. There is also the tender and important matter of Hermione Granger and the House Elves. In the books, when Hermione learned that the elves who cooked and cleaned within the castle were bound to serve without pay or freedom, her heart could not rest. And so she founded a small society, which she called the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, a name she shortened fondly to SPEW, though few of her friends took the campaign as seriously as she did. She knitted little woolen hats and left them hidden about the common room, hoping an elf might lift one and be freed by the accidental gift. She sold badges. She gathered members. She wrote earnest speeches. The films had no time for this, and yet it tells us so much about who Hermione truly was, a girl who could not walk past unfairness without wishing to mend it, even when the whole world thought her foolish for trying. It is one of the warmest threads in all the books, and it deserves to be remembered on a quiet night such as this. Then there are the Marauders, the 4 friends who wrote their names upon a piece of enchanted parchment long before Harry was ever born. In the books, their story is told with far more depth. 4 boys at Hogwarts who called themselves Moony and Wormtail, and Padfoot and Prongs. Remus Lupin was Moony, the gentle werewolf whose secret his friends chose to share rather than to fear. Peter Pettigrew was Wormtail, the smallest of them, who could become a rat. Sirius Black was Padfoot, who could become a great black dog. And James Potter, Harry's own father, was Prongs, who could become a stag. To keep Remus company on the nights when the moon turned him wild, the other 3 had learned the difficult and secret art of becoming animals, an act of loyalty so deep it took them years to master. Together they created the Marauders' Map, a magical chart that showed every corner of the castle and every footstep within it. And though the film gave us the map itself, only the books tell the full and moving story of the friendship that made it, and of how that friendship was slowly broken by fear and betrayal in the years that followed. The great headmaster himself, Albus Dumbledore, is also drawn far more fully upon the page. The films showed us a wise and kindly old man, but the books gave us the whole long shadow of his life, the ambitions of his youth, the sorrow of his family, the sister he loved and lost, the terrible mistake he made when he was young and dazzled by dreams of power, and the lifelong effort he made afterward to be better than he had once been. It is a story of a man who was not perfect, who carried regret with him always, and who chose again and again to do what was right rather than what was easy. This deeper history helps us understand why he guided Harry as he did, and why he trusted so quietly in the goodness of ordinary people. The film could only hint at it, but the books hold it whole. Beyond these, there were whole corners of the wizarding world that the films simply had no room to show. There was Ludo Bagman, the cheerful and careless head of magical games and sports, a former sportsman who loved a wager and who tangled himself in debts he could not pay. There was the tangle of politics within the Ministry of Magic, the ambitious officials, the quiet corruption, the newspaper headlines that swayed the moods of the whole country. There were Quidditch matches described in loving detail, and lessons in strange subjects, and minor characters whose small kindnesses and small cruelties gave the world its texture and its warmth. There was Winky the house elf, and Creature's long and sorrowful history, and many gentle scenes at the burrow, and letters and puddings and holidays. Each of these was a small thread, and together they wove a world so full that it felt utterly real. And there is one thing that no film could ever truly capture, however lovely its images, and that is the quiet interior of a person's own thoughts. In the books, we sit inside Harry's mind as he wonders and worries and hopes. We feel his uncertainty, his loneliness, his flickers of anger, and his sudden warmth. We hear the private reasoning of a boy trying to be brave when he does not feel brave at all. Prose can hold these hidden things, these soft and secret movements of the heart, in a way that pictures never quite can. It is why so many readers feel that they knew Harry as a friend, because they had lived so long inside his quiet thoughts. So if ever you finish the films and feel that you would like a little more, know that the books are waiting, patient and unhurried, holding the fuller and richer version of it all. Nothing is truly lost. Peeves still drifts through the corridors there. Hermione still knits her little hats. The Marauders still laugh together in their youth. And Dumbledore still carries his long and gentle sorrow. The story is deeper than any single screen could show, and it welcomes anyone who wishes to return and read it slowly, one soft page at a time, until the whole world of it settles warmly around them like a familiar blanket. Up next in Chapter 19, how the HBO series will tell it anew, we'll drift gently toward the future of the story, and imagine how a new and slower telling might have room at last for the small forgotten things, unfolding the tale across many quiet hours the way a bedtime story unfolds across many peaceful nights. Chapter 19. How the HBO series will tell it anew there is a quiet comfort in knowing that a story you love is not truly finished, that it may return once more in a softer, slower, more patient shape, and settle over you again like a familiar blanket pulled up beneath the chin. In the last chapter, we wandered gently through all the small things the films had to leave behind, the pages and the corners and the tender details that never quite reached the screen, and we felt, perhaps, a small ache at how much had been folded away for the sake of time. And so it is a gentle relief to turn now toward what is planned to come, toward a new telling of this old and beloved tale, one that is expected to move without hurry, one that hopes to gather up all those lost and quiet things and hold them once again in the warm and steady light of the story. For it is reported that a brand new television series is being made, a series conceived for the streaming home known as HBO, and it is described by those who are shaping it as a faithful and long-form retelling of the 7 original books. That single word, faithful, carries a great deal of gentle promise within it, for it suggests a wish to walk closely beside the pages once more, to follow the path that was first laid down in ink, and to let the story breathe at its own natural and unhurried pace. Where the films had to move swiftly, choosing and trimming and letting go, this new telling is planned instead to linger, to slow its steps, to give each moment the room it was always meant to have. The shape of the plan is a lovely one to imagine as you drift, for it is said that roughly 1 season of television will be devoted to each of the 7 books. 7 books, and 7 long chapters of television to match them, 1 gentle season for each volume, unfolding across what is expected to be close to a decade of time. Think of that softly for a moment. An entire book given its own full season, its own slow and spacious arc, so that no corridor need be skipped and no small friendship need be rushed. The winding staircases might turn at their leisure. The lessons in the great old classrooms might be allowed to settle, and the quiet growing up of three young friends might be shown with all the patience that a true and unhurried telling can afford. A decade is a wondrously long and gentle span in which to tell a single story, and there is something almost like real life in that shape. For the children of the tale are meant to grow older as the seasons pass, just as we all grow older with the turning of the years. The plan, as it has been reported, is to let time move honestly, so that the young faces we meet in the earliest season may age naturally alongside the story they are living, season after season, book after book. It is the sort of slow unfolding that a bedtime tale understands well, the kind that asks for nothing but patience and rewards it with depth. And it invites us simply to trust that the story will arrive in its own good time. And there will be new faces, of course, a brand new cast gathered to carry these old and familiar names once more. Fresh young performers are expected to step into the roles of Harry and of Ron and of Hermione, three children we have known and loved for so long, now to be met again as if for the very first time. There is a tenderness in that idea, in watching wholly new faces take up these gentle roles, for it means the story is being handed onward, offered again to a new set of hearts and a new turn of the years. And around these young ones, it is reported that several admired and accomplished actors are joining the grown-up parts. The teachers and the guardians and the watchful elders of the tale, lending their long practice and their steady warmth to the wise old figures who move quietly through the background of the story. What draws me most gently of all, as I think on this coming series, is the stated wish behind it, the intention that is said to guide its making. For it is described as an effort to restore the depth and the detail that the films, for all their beauty, simply had no room to hold. All those quiet threads we spoke of in the chapter just before this one, the small friendships and the folded away histories, and the tender little scenes that lived only on the page, may at last be given space to unfold again. That is the hope that is spoken of, the wish to bring back what was gently set aside, to let the fuller shape of the story emerge once more into view, slowly and softly, and without any need to rush. We must hold all of this lightly, though, the way one holds a small and sleeping thing, for these are plans and hopes and expectations rather than settled certainties. A great work of television is a long time in the making, and much of what is spoken of now belongs to the realm of intention, of what is planned, and what is reported, and what is expected to come. It is said that the series is expected to arrive somewhere around the closing of the year 2026, though such timings are gentle by nature and may drift as any large and careful undertaking will. And so we simply keep it as a soft and pleasant thought, a thing to look forward to without grasping too tightly, a warm little light glowing quietly on the far edge of the calendar. There is a peculiar and lovely comfort in a story that agrees to be told again, and told slowly, for it means the ending we already know is not really an ending at all. The tale we have followed through book and through film may soon be poured once more into a new and roomier vessel, one shaped with the patience of many seasons, and we are invited simply to wait for it, in the same way one waits for a familiar season to come around again. Nothing is lost by waiting, and there is a real sweetness in the anticipation itself, in knowing that somewhere, quietly and carefully, kind and skillful hands are at work, restoring the fuller shape of a story we already hold dear. So let this be a peaceful thought to carry with you now, into the soft edges of your rest. The story is not gone, and it is not finished, and it may yet return to us slower and deeper and gentler than before, unfolding across a long span of years, welcoming new faces into old and cherished roles, and reaching back with patient care for all the small and tender things that time once asked it to leave behind. It is a thing to look forward to, softly and without hurry. The way one looks forward to a warm light left burning in a distant window, waiting kindly for the traveler to come home. Up next, in Chapter 20, What to Watch for When the Story Begins, we'll settle gently into the quiet art of simply being ready, gathering a few soft and unhurried thoughts on how to greet an old tale told anew, and letting the calm anticipation carry us tenderly towards sleep. Chapter 20. What to watch for when the story begins, and so, at the very last, we come to the beginning. For whether the door into this world opens through the new series, glowing softly on a screen in a darkened room, or through the pages of the books, which have waited quietly on so many shelves for so many years, the invitation is the same, and it is a gentle one. There is no hurry here. The story does not rush, and it asks that you do not rush either, but rather that you settle in, the way one settles into a warm and familiar chair, and let the world unfold at its own patient pace, one small wonder at a time. For anyone about to step across that threshold for the first time, there is a quiet joy in knowing that everything lies ahead, still unspoiled, still waiting, and there are small things worth savoring along the way, little details that are easy to pass over in the excitement of the adventure, yet reward the traveler who lingers. The way a stone castle seems to breathe with its moving staircases and its whispering portraits, the warmth of a common room fire on a cold evening, the clatter of the feast in the great hall beneath a ceiling enchanted to mirror the sky, the soft hoot of an owl carrying a letter through the night. These are the textures of the world, and they are meant to be felt slowly, the way one savors the last light of a long summer day. There is a particular gladness that comes from noticing how the earliest moments quietly plant seeds that only bloom much later, and this is one of the deepest pleasures of the whole tale, though it is a pleasure that cannot be hurried. A name mentioned once in passing, so lightly that it seems no more than a stray word, may return chapters, and even years later, carrying a weight no one could have guessed. An object glimpsed on a shelf, a locket, a ring, a small and battered book, may seem at first to be nothing at all, and only much later reveal itself to be everything. A kindness done or a cruelty suffered in the very first days may echo forward across the whole of a life. To read or to watch slowly, then, is not merely a matter of patience, but a way of honoring the care with which the story was made, for so much of it was placed there long before it was needed, waiting quietly to matter. And, beneath the adventure, beneath the spells and the shadows and the great sweeping turns of fortune, there runs a current far gentler and far stronger than any of them, and it is worth watching for above all else. It is kindness, plain and unremarkable, the sort that offers a seat on a train to a lonely boy, or a handful of sweets, or a knitted jumper at Christmas to a child who has never before had a home to send one. It is courage, not the loud and glittering kind, but the quiet sort that trembles and is frightened and chooses to go forward all the same. Watch for the moments when someone small does something brave for no reward, and you will find the true heart of the story beating softly there. There is a richness, too, in the minor characters, the ones who pass through only briefly, yet leave the world larger for having been in it. The gamekeeper with the enormous heart and the gentle hands, the kindly caretaker of the school infirmary, the ghost who drifts weeping through a bathroom, or the one who has told the same long story 100 times over. The shopkeepers and the portrait subjects and the friends met upon the very first journey. None of them is merely furniture, for each is a whole life glimpsed in passing, and the world feels lived in and true precisely because it is so full of them. It is a fine and quiet pleasure to let yourself grow fond of these smaller souls, to notice them, and to carry them with you. And through it all, woven so deeply into the fabric of the tale that they can never quite be pulled apart from it, run the great and simple themes that make this story linger in the heart long after the last page is turned, or the last scene has faded. There is love, which is shown again and again to be the oldest and deepest magic of all, stronger than fear, and stronger even than death. There is friendship, the sort that is forged in ordinary moments and tested in hard ones, and holds fast through every one of them. There is loss, treated always with tenderness, never hidden away, for the story does not pretend that grief can be avoided, only that it can be borne, and borne together. And there is, quietly threaded through so many of the choices that matter most, the difference between what is right and what is easy, which is perhaps the truest lesson the whole tale has to offer, for the characters who are remembered best are so often the ones who chose the harder and the kinder path when no one would have blamed them for choosing otherwise. If there is one small piece of counsel to carry across the threshold, it is only this: that you go slowly, and without hurry, and without any need to reach the end. There is no prize for finishing quickly. The joy is not in the arriving, but in the long, unhurried traveling, in the pause to look up at the enchanted ceiling, in the willingness to sit a while by the fire before the next door opens. Let the world reveal itself the way a landscape reveals itself to someone walking through it at an easy pace, hill after gentle hill, and you will find that it gives up its treasures far more freely to the one who is content to wander than to the one who runs. Whether you turn the pages yourself or watch the tale unfold in light and sound, the same soft invitation holds: to stay, to notice, to let yourself be carried. For in the end, when all the spells have been cast and all the shadows have lifted, this is at its very heart a story about home and about belonging and about the long and tender business of growing up. It is about a child who believed himself unwanted and unremarkable, and who discovered a place where he was known and loved, and friends who became a family, and a world that had, all along, been waiting for him to arrive. It is about the ordinary miracle of finding the people who make you feel that you have come home at last, and about the slow, patient way that children become the grown souls they were always meant to be, carrying their childhood with them like a lantern into whatever comes next. And that is a gentle thought to rest upon now, as the fire settles into embers and the room grows dim and soft around you. The story is there whenever you are ready for it, patient as the castle itself, in no hurry at all. It will keep. The train will still be waiting at the platform, the lamps will still be lit in the great hall, the owls will still be circling the towers under a wide and starry sky, whenever you choose to return to them. There is nothing left now to reach for, and nothing left to do, only to let the world you have glimpsed settle quietly within you, warm and safe and whole. So let your thoughts grow slow and your breathing grow deep, and let the gentle weight of sleep draw near, for the journey is done for tonight, and everything is exactly as it should be, and it is time, at last, to rest. And so we come, softly, to the end of our gentle tour. Tonight we wandered through a world hidden beside our own and met the boy who lived. We walked the halls of Hogwarts and its 4 houses, and heard the 1,000-year story of its founders. We learned how wands and spells are said to work, how the ministry keeps its laws, and how the cruel prejudice of blood divided the wizarding world. We followed the long shadow of Lord Voldemort through the First War and the Second. We met Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix, and we sat with Harry, Ron, and Hermione at the heart of it all. We traced the 7 books as one long story. We weighed the loyalty of Severus Snape, and we studied the horcruxes born of a fear of death and the deathly hallows that promised mastery over it. We glimpsed the creatures of that world and the ordinary joys of school and Quidditch. We stood at the Battle of Hogwarts, and we considered what the films left out and how a new telling might bring it all to life once more. There is nothing here you need to carry into sleep. Let each name and place drift gently away from you, down through still dark water, until only calm remains. You are safe. You are warm. Whatever tomorrow brings, none of it asks anything of you now. Let your breathing slow, and let the last of the day dissolve like mist over a quiet lake. Good night. If this story carried you toward rest, stay with us. There are many more long, gentle tales waiting for the nights to come.